Chapter 302. The Talon Tower was one of the lower levels of the mega magic organization, the Mystical Blade. Their standards for selecting students were quite high. Ordinary magic academies only required students to be at least 20 years old to be a one-circle mage. However, the Talon Tower required students to be at least 18 years old to be a two-circle mage. Although it didn't seem like much of a difference, only 2 years less and one circle earlier. It just so happened that those 2 years were the golden period for growth. Even without those 2 years, one would still need to be a one-circle mage, and that was the boundary between the iron rank and the bronze rank. The difference would be like the difference between heaven and earth. It could be said that any student who reached the Talon Tower standards would still be considered a top student in any other magic academy's second or third year. Even with such high standards, the number of students applying each year would still far exceed the number of students accepted. The Talon Tower could only select the best over the best, and those who managed to enter would be far above the standard. They would either be geniuses or monstrous geniuses. Of course, the greater the investment, the greater the benefits. The Talon Tower's standards were set high, and it was able to attract so many people to join of their own volition. Naturally, the Talon Tower had an advantage over other magic academies. There was no need to mention the teachers, equipment, library, and so on. The Talon Tower's standards weren't that different from other magic academies. However, the Talon Tower's greatest advantage over other magic academies was that not only would archmages occasionally come to pick apprentices, top-level mages from the Mystical Blade would also come to teach at regular intervals. The top-level mages with the emblem of Endless Truth's Talon Tower would teach at regular intervals, and the students would have to show their true abilities. Not just the students, even the academy's teachers would try their best to find an opportunity to attend the Talon Tower's classes. For the students, this was an extra reward for the excellent. That was why only students who were above average in all aspects could attend the Talon Tower's classes with the teacher's permission. That was also why the Talon Tower Magic Academy's monthly classes were no different from a festival. If the teacher's class was good, there would likely be discussions about it all the way until the next class. Of course, due to the fact that the average quality of the teacher was extremely high, the quality of the teaching would not be bad. However, the problem was that some masters found it troublesome and would directly throw out their latest research results and harp on it. Perhaps they would gain something from their own summary, and a very small number of geniuses would also benefit greatly from it. However, for 99% of the rookies, they would definitely not understand. That was why the quality of the class and how much the audience would learn wouldn't depend on the teacher's skill level or the audience's skill level. The difference would be too great. Rather, it depended on whether the teacher had prepared the class for the audience to understand. To me, this was a problem that was neither too big nor too small. The Mystical Blade's internal rules were quite loose to begin with, and there were quite a few top-level mages as well. It was likely that I wouldn't be able to receive a lecture from them in just a few short years. It was likely that a certain kind-hearted person was acting up out of kindness, giving me a chance to promote myself and speed up my integration with the Mystical Blade. This is indeed a good thing, but the problem is that I don't know what to say. Although I was indeed a rare recipient of 2 emblems of truth, and based on my past history, this honor was well-deserved, there was really nothing much to say about it. Talk about frost magic. According to the traditional research method of increasing my power level by level, I could only be considered a third circle mage, bronze peak. Most of them were more like magical beasts with natural talent magic. They would naturally grow through instinct and actual combat. Of course, I could explain the foundational magic that I obtained from the Snowy Mountain, but the problem was that ordinary humans would never be able to learn it even if they understood it. It would be a waste of time to explain it. What about the high-level research results of ice and snow magic? My own original research results? No matter if it was frigid winter earth or ice aeon. Although they were both top-ranked magical masterpieces in the past century, they were obviously beyond the comprehension of mortals. I didn't intend to give others the chance to analyze my trump cards. As for undead magic, it wasn't that I couldn't teach them, and I was willing to teach them. But the problem was that undead magic would forever be gray in nature. Even the Sword of Order wouldn't teach such forbidden magic in public. And if I insisted on teaching these novices how to dissect corpses or how to create abominations, it was likely that everyone would look at me in a strange way. This is the problem of not being a professional. I clearly have a lot of knowledge, but it's so difficult to tell them. But after thinking about it for a while, I came to a decision. Since regular lectures are meaningless, then let's talk about something unconventional. Perfect timing. It's about time I tossed out a lot of words. From the outside, Talon Tower's lecture hall didn't seem large. But when I walked in, I discovered that it was a large area that had been expanded by spatial magic. This was a gigantic auditorium that could hold 500 to 600 people. Magical lights at the top of the auditorium illuminated the beautiful marble tiles, making the auditorium seem even more extravagant. The stair seats were already filled with people. Just like usual, 10 minutes before the lecture began, the auditorium was already filled with spectators. But unlike usual, this time, not only were there students, but there were also many white-bearded old men and professors who seemed young, but were actually countless years old. The first row was actually filled with veteran mages. The most inconceivable part was that there were even several mages who were at the level of emblematic truths. This was normally quite rare. After all, even if these old mages were able to obtain the right to listen to my lecture, they were already top-level experts in their own research fields. Even if they were willing to lower their pride and listen to a lecture from someone of the same generation, it would be quite difficult for them to learn anything from this lecture that was aimed at novices. If their research fields really overlapped and they needed any information or magical knowledge, it would be far better to directly exchange information with the person in question. There would be no need to owe anyone any favors. It would seem that the unknown Archmage Roland is quite amazing. None of the acolytes who were able to enter Talon Tower were idiots. Just by seeing this scene, they knew that this Archmage that they had never heard of before was obviously no ordinary person. And the few that learned of his identity from their elders and teachers were even more expectant of this Archmage's teachings. Of course, due to the fact that Roland's name played the role of a demon king in children's bedtime stories, as well as the fear that came with it. These people who knew all chose to sit in the back row near the door. Oh my, fortunately, I didn't intend on just casually trying to fool everyone. The moment I entered the lecture hall, I was shocked to see such a scene. It would seem that I had still underestimated how important the name Yonya was to mages. As I looked around, I saw Cade and his acolytes, Osloan, Aloso, and many other old acquaintances from the Mystical Blade were all here. Even that old fool Anglo is here. And there's actually someone glaring at me? Oh, so it's that little girl Cher. She probably already knows my true identity, yet she still dares to glare at me? She's surprisingly courageous. But when I walked up to the podium, all these unnecessary thoughts became unnecessary. What I wanted to say had long since been buried in my heart. I raised my highlighter pen and hesitated for a moment before finally writing a few words on the podium. Revolution, a new era for mortals. Where should I start? Should I start with everything that happened in the underground? Or should I start with the rising elemental tide in the entire world? Or should I start with the impending Armageddon? Or should I start with the secrets of the gods? Compared to my peers who hid in their ivory towers, I had already experienced far too much, to the point where I didn't know where to start. Just now, I still didn't know where to start. But now that this topic that represented revolution was brought up, I had far too many random thoughts in my mind, so I didn't even know where to start. Since there are far too many random thoughts, I'll just casually talk about it. I'll say whatever I want. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask, but I might not answer. This first sentence made most people feel that this teacher of mine was unreliable. The Holy War is already upon us. I'm afraid that everyone hasn't experienced it yet. Yep, I should say that you're not interested. After all, we mages are used to being bystanders. But I'm afraid that the situation this time is quite special. It's basically impossible to be bystanders. The moment I said this, many people frowned in displeasure. Could it be that this teacher of mine was from the pro-war faction? But this was a purely academic lecture. Wasn't it a little inappropriate for him to talk about politics? But I laughed when I saw this situation. From a certain standpoint, These archmages of the Cloud Tower had been secluded for far too long. They probably didn't even notice the recent changes. No, perhaps they had learned about the latest news from certain sources, but they didn't feel that it had anything to do with them. What I want to discuss isn't the annoying politics, but the era that we must face. Everyone can see the growth of the elemental tide. Leveling up in research has become much easier. But this is only the beginning. I pointed out with my finger, and a silver light of order illuminated the entire auditorium. This was a divine light that represented law and justice, as well as a new type of power. The power of law is a new power of order obtained through understanding of law and judging crimes. This is also my greatest achievement in the underground. Perhaps many people have already heard of it, but most people probably treat it as another form of the power of holy light. Not many people know that this power is actually quite suitable for mages. That's because this power was originally created by mages. Before I even finished speaking, I caused an uproar in the auditorium. Although the god of law had been a hot topic recently, the power of law had only just begun. Just because of its identity as the power of order, most mages viewed it as a power of order similar to holy light, which was far too much of a waste. As one of the creators of this power, I can guarantee that this is indeed the most suitable power for mages. The foundational structure of this power is law magic, as well as the belief and understanding of law itself. Perhaps other job classes will be able to use this power as well, but when it comes to logical thinking and comprehension abilities, which job class can compare to us mages? Furthermore, there are basically no requirements on the user's ability to control the elements in magic. The threshold for entry is quite low. Some things were left unsaid. When I mentioned that there was no requirement on the user's ability to control the elements in magic, the auditorium was in an uproar. Sensing the elements and controlling magic were the most basic requirements for a mage. If these were lost, wouldn't that mean that any youngster with a certain level of intelligence would be able to use the power of law? That's right. This was a reason why I had always believed that only the power of law could fundamentally change the world. It was probably the most basic supernatural power. And in order to maintain this power, one must follow the teachings and instructions of law. Not only must one abide by the law, one must also enforce the law for the sake of justice. And when the number of powerful law mages increases, when a vast majority of crimes are judged fairly, certain things and rules in this world will naturally change. That's right, this era belongs to mortals. As the god of law leveled up and countless law job classes worked hard, more and more law incantations were invented. I believe that it wouldn't be long before law incantators, the advanced job class for mages, became the third foundational job class after Justice Knight and Judge. And at that time, becoming a mage wouldn't be as difficult as it was now. Mages would definitely be able to step down from their divine pedestals. And this was only the beginning. Since I wanted to start a prairie fire, it would be quite easy to extinguish a single flame. That was why I simultaneously ignited several flames. You've probably already heard about the successful development of the small-scale energy source, Olivia's magic box. But you probably don't know that the intellectual who successfully solved this core problem is the young alchemist Olivia from the Northlands. She comes from Rhodes, a small country in the north that most of you probably don't know about. Or you might even think of it as a country of barbarians. And she, this little barbarian girl from the Northlands, is only 17 years old this year. Yet she has already invented this creation that is destined to change the world. Facts spoke louder than words. The easiest way to beat down the arrogance and complacency of arrogant and unruly youths was to see the achievements of their peers. But what I wanted to say wasn't just the surface. Even though Olivia didn't have any achievements in the future, she was already destined to be recorded in history as the inventor of the small-scale energy source. I'm currently using the results of this research to submit the emblem of endless truth in the field of alchemy to the Truth Symposium. It's highly likely that Olivia will become the youngest mage in the history of the Truth Symposium. The moment I said this, everyone below the podium started discussing amongst themselves. Negative comments like she's not qualified, too rushed, and so on came out. However, Some of the older mages nodded slightly in agreement. They had already seen through the true meaning of this invention. Perhaps some of you have already thought about how the creation of the Olivia's magic box would allow lone mages to have backup mana reserves. But you never imagined that its greater use would be to allow mortals without any talent in magic to try and learn magic. That's impossible. This is blasphemy. The god of magic. How is this possible? The podium was already filled with exclamations of shock. Mages were proud to be mages. How could they easily believe that an ordinary person had invaded their domain? But facts spoke louder than words. Soon, the memory crystal that had been prepared beforehand started playing a video. It was the first time that the Silver Cross Legion, composed of the 4 elemental swordcasters, had appeared on the battlefield in the Northlands for the first time. The wind blades flew in an orderly fashion, and the wind blades were launched in an orderly manner, like fireballs being thrown in a toss performance. Even the elite wizards in front of him exclaimed in shock and trembled at the might and elegance of the spellcaster group. Of course, they're still quite immature. But some things are the hardest to learn at the beginning. Even semi-god mages start off with first circle arcane spells. As long as they persist, the mages will become more than 10 times stronger than they are now. That's why I say that this is an era of change. This is an era that belongs to mortals. Chapter 303. Looking back at the past, if I were to list everything I had done and what I was about to do, perhaps I could easily see a clear main goal: to increase the power of the entire world's mortals. Did this world lack powerful individuals? I didn't think so. Not to mention how many top-level mages in the Cloud Tower were rotting away in their research labs. There were countless dragons, giants, and hidden powerful individuals. Even Emperor Yonya back in the day was only ranked in the 30s among those who often caused trouble. This world was huge, and there were many powerful individuals. But could they become the power to change the world? The answer was obviously no. There were far too many coincidences that couldn't be repeated, and a large amount of time and resources would be required. The number of such individuals would forever be limited. And with the changes of the entire generation, it was impossible to count on a small number of individuals or small groups to change the overall situation. This was something I had learned from my past failures. The most annoying part was that these hidden individuals had incredibly high opinions of themselves. Just like the archmages of the Cloud Tower, they viewed the Holy War as nothing more than a passing cloud. By the time they realized that the situation was special and that they couldn't escape, it would be far too late. Powerful individuals are rare. Chosen ones? It was just that most people didn't even have a way to become stronger. Do you want to become a top-level, powerful individual favored by the heavens? Haha. As long as I increase the number of foundational warriors, miracles and whatnot will naturally come. Geniuses and whatnot will be easier to deal with. Aren't they also geniuses who surpass 99% of their peers? Perhaps I can't increase the 1% that has too many coincidences, but as long as I increase the 99%, that means that the number of foundational warriors will increase by 10 times, and geniuses and whatnot will naturally increase exponentially. If this world that was destined to face countless fatal trials was a lone boat before a storm, then, before the raging waves of the future arrived, the most fundamental ballast stone was to desperately strengthen the weight of the boat. That was the foundation to withstand the storm. I would increase the power level of the majority of ordinary people in this world, and then use my authority behind the scenes, law and justice points, to guide them. This would reduce internal conflicts as much as possible and increase the world's ability to resist the storm. This was my choice. The appearance of the power of law and the 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers brought about by Olivia's magic box gave ordinary people the possibility of reaching the peak. However, this was only the beginning. Beneath the half-joking name of the Great Industrial Party was a tremendous ambition to change the entire world. I took a deep breath. What I was about to say next was the most important point of my speech. The small energy pool, Olivia's magic box, has far more uses than that. Its greatest beneficiary is definitely not spellcasters. Perhaps some of you have already tried Iron Horse, haven't you? What do you think? How about the war horses? Ignoring the commotion below the stage, the conclusion had probably appeared long ago. War horses are very expensive. Their breed and bloodline are both big problems. Furthermore, the nurturing period is very long, and they also need a complete set of equipment. It could be said that a fully armored warhorse was equivalent to half a knight's life. Not to mention, warhorses required the highest quality of food and fodder, which was why the lords of various regions were willing to risk their lives in order to maintain a sufficient number of knights. And these iron horses, some of the nobles in the audience had already guessed what I was going to say. It's cheap, really cheap. Compared to warhorses, the cost was not high. It only required some engineering materials and did not require any special magic materials. It could be easily mass-produced. In terms of performance, even with the current technology, before the energy was used up, it was still better than a warhorse with a full body armor. The body of the iron horse can also be stacked with armor. Its defensive capabilities are even stronger than a physical body. I closed my eyes, but I felt as if I had already traveled through the river of time. On the battlefield of the future, these Iron Knight wielded lances and dwarven muskets as they attacked the invaders at lightning speed. And they were only a part of this Iron Army. This is only the beginning. I can tell you that self-propelled, super small mechanical armor has already been successfully developed. It can greatly increase an individual's combat strength and survivability. Also, heavy tanks that can rival the mammoth war elephants are currently being researched. Large Titan armor and war machines that can be steadily mass-produced are also being produced. Very soon, the engineering that you all ignored will go from being a laughable little toy to a path of truth that can rival magic. And the people who control them will be mere mortals that you all look down on. Perhaps the mortals of the future will be even more powerful than you all expect. In other words, the flow of history is unstoppable. Heroes would be born in response to the times, and revolutions would occur in response to the tides. Even without me, the magical engineering revolution was destined to occur. In that history, when the Armageddon arrived, the Ottoman Empire had already suffered several serious blows and was in dire straits. They finally gave up the technology for small batteries that were destined to change the world. What followed was a revolution in magical engineering. Although there were many detours later on, the final product of magical engineering still changed the world, changing people's lifestyles and fighting styles. It even changed the entire civilization of the He continent. But since I was here, how could I possibly delay the most precious time to prepare for war? Thanks to the butterfly effect I caused, Olivia's invention of this core technology was already more than 10 years ahead of history. Timlad also didn't need to waste so much time to grow. And with my experience as a guide, he was able to avoid many wrong research directions and take fewer detours. No, just the memories of modern warfare in my mind were enough to bring forward the evolution of engineering by thousands of years. Sometimes, even a small improvement would require countless years of hard work and battle experience. The most obvious example was how tanks had been modified from agricultural tractors back in the day. Did World War I's popular barbed wire entanglements, trenches, and machine gun bunkers no longer work in this world? Perhaps a small trench and some defensive facilities, along with a few mortals stationed there, would be enough for an entire army of knights to sacrifice countless lives to defend it. In the next generation, it'll be hundreds of times easier to obtain power than it is now. Even ordinary people will be able to kill powerful individuals. Revolution. This is no longer a simple invention. This is a new industrial revolution. This is the goal of our great industrial party. That's right. Heroes would be born in troubled times. It was as if this world instinctively refused to accept the fact that it was about to perish. Soon, new technology, new magic, and new powerful individuals would appear like mushrooms after the rain. As the enemies of the world became stronger and stronger, the native residents of this world would also become insanely powerful. And what I needed to do now was to start an industrial revolution in this magical fantasy world, providing sufficient soil and foundation for this revolution. Perhaps some people might wonder if such a revolution is necessary, or if it's necessary to stop it. What I'm about to show everyone is some real information. There are prophecies as well as current events. I can vouch for the veracity of this information with my own name. I took a deep breath. There were some things that needed to be revealed. You all still want to be cowards? Let's see how you're going to cower when others are already at your doorstep. And so, the information that had been broadcasted on the Borealis back in the day was once again shown to the world. It was almost like a prophecy. Hordes of demons walked the streets. Burning cities groaned in pain under the Black Knight's iron hooves. The undead invaded the living's territory. The elves' holy lands became nothing more than abandoned craters, and lava covered the land of ice and snow. The most shocking part was still the ancient ruins. There was a damaged tower that shone with the light of an arcane spell, which doubtlessly indicated that this was the current prosperous Cloud Tower. At the same time, my memory crystal also displayed the scenes of recent battles. The Underground's demon armies invaded. The Northland's ferocious beastmen attacked cities. The undead calamity invaded Aichi. The clash of forbidden spells that died midway. The Ottoman Empire's Rain City. The Earth Elemental Plane's Earth Elemental Lords and Divine Sins. Every single battle was difficult to deal with, and every single battle was fought to the very last moment. While the entire world was quietly changing and epic battles were constantly happening in the outside world, the mages in the clouds were still living in their own world. The information about these battles would at most become a topic of idle chatter before and after meals. No matter how intense someone else's war was, it would only cause some exclamations. Perhaps they might feel something at the time, but they would soon forget about it. However, seeing things directly was different from reading words on paper. Scenes after scenes of the Armageddon from the future intersected with scenes of war in reality. Reality and fables were placed together, and the God's declaration from not too long ago seemed to echo in everyone's ears. Even a most confident person would have to carefully consider just how far this holy war would develop, and whether or not they would be able to safely stay out of it as they expected. Facts spoke louder than words, so I didn't waste any more words. Now, it was time for me to answer my questions. How did these scenes in the prophecy come about? Prophecy magic can't possibly produce such results. Not only that, prophecy magic can no longer produce results. Also, when did you learn about these prophecies? As the highest-ranked member of the Mystical Blade, Osloan had to ask this question. As for me, I had long since expected such a question. In fact, I had even prepared an answer for it. Origin? You could say that it was a coincidence, but I can guarantee in the name of the Holy Light that this is definitely the truest history and future of this world. This is the truth that will definitely happen if I don't interfere. From a certain standpoint, my identity as a user of Holy Light was quite helpful to me. At the very least, it was quite convincing when I said such a truest lie oath. As for when I learned about this, would you believe me if I told you that I learned about this 300 years ago? Yes, I swear in the name of the Holy Light that 370 years ago, when I was still a 7 or 8-year-old child, I already knew that all of this was destined to happen. The glorious holy light on my finger proved the veracity of my oath. The entire auditorium was in utter chaos. As for me, it was already time for me to retreat. Fine then, there wasn't much to say. It was likely that I would expose myself if I said any more. There's another truth behind the Yongya calamity. The history textbooks should have been rewritten long ago. A slandered hero of darkness? A sole survivor of the Armageddon? A madman driven insane by despair? A true prince of the Northlands? Using the latest research data to prove the veracity of the Armageddon prophecies. Interview with Archmage Finthorin from another dimension. I was truly impressed by the professionalism of a journalist from another dimension as I looked at the stacks of extra editions and additional editions on my desk. I didn't even know that I had done so many things in secret. I had become a tragic hero who had to save the world despite being slandered by the Holy Light. TSK, TSK, TSK. This article even talks about your past love history. You actually had two lovers and a concubine. It's so believable. Roland, did you take revenge on the Holy Church because your lover died? The black cat skillfully flipped through the pages of the newspaper with its paws as it searched for new jokes. After it finished laughing, it even licked some milk to quench its thirst. It was becoming more and more like a real cat. Oomph. I was only 14 years old when I died. Do you think anyone would believe such a thing? Making a public declaration was quite valuable. That afternoon, all the mage organizations learned about the contents of my declaration. Meanwhile, although it was almost an open secret that Roland was the Emperor of Yongye, there was still no mention of Yongye in the newspapers and magazines sold to the public. However, all the mage organizations' internal publications were already filled with all sorts of guesses and rumors. What was slightly worth rejoicing about was the fact that the various organizations didn't want to touch our sensitive nerves. At the very least, the current trend of news reports was rather acceptable. Although it felt rather strange to mysteriously become a hero of the dark side, it was still much better than mysteriously becoming a scapegoat in the past. After I revealed the truth, if the mage organizations wanted to cooperate with me and obtain even more benefits, they would naturally have to help me advertise my existence. As for killing this new technology that was still in its infancy, forcefully stealing it, not to mention the fact that it was basically impossible to accomplish, sometimes I even felt proud of my notoriety. It was such an incredible reputation. The only side effect was that today's business reached a new low. Is it still the same outside? Yep, there are many people outside your shop, but very few of them come into shop. They're all old friends who are at the level of a teacher. It seems that all the new customers today are here for you. Aren't you going to greet them? Forget it. When I went out for some exercise this morning, I scared away several dozen customers and even fainted a few. I feel like I've become a Medusa. Everyone I see is petrified, and everyone collapses when I stare at them. There's even the sound effect of ghosts wailing and wolves howling. Why don't you talk about those girls who were enchanted by the story of a tragic hero? The first love letter in your life feels pretty good, doesn't it? Oomph. It's not the first. Fine, don't look at me like that. I admit that in my memory, it's the first love letter, all right? Still, I've received many dueling letters, curse letters, and Dear John letters in the past. Perhaps someone accidentally mailed the letter to the wrong person, or wrote the wrong name on the cover, or a girl was too embarrassed to write the wrong name and didn't send it to me. Why was it that the more I talked about it, the sadder I felt? Let's talk about something more interesting. The person outside is still squatting there? Yep, she said that as an honorable law enforcer, she absolutely has to keep an eye on you. She told her, don't even think about doing anything evil in this city. Heloise even imitated that damned girl's tone of speech. It felt quite similar. At the very least, it was quite obvious that she was gnashing her teeth and not letting me have an easy time. I glanced outside the window at the female, Mage Cher, and her security team under a tree. I could only helplessly shake my head. At any rate, I didn't intend on doing anything illegal for the time being. If she wanted to squat here, then let her. If she wants to be a vigilante, then let her be. She still has enough money left to hire a security guard. Yep, that was indeed what I was thinking. From a certain standpoint, the existence of a vigilante department would make customers feel more at ease. I think that you should think of a way to ask her to leave as soon as possible. Why? It's not like I intend on doing anything illegal. It's only been one morning, and she's already raided 3 times. What's there to be afraid of? It's not like I have a guilty conscience. Just let her do whatever she wants. She's using the excuse of searching for taxes. She'll seriously look through the accounts every time. Are you certain that you're fake accounts? I'll immediately think of a way to make her leave. Chapter 304. Due to the fact that I had given a very impressive speech that day, my speech had been very successful and attracted countless gazes. The very next day, my great industrial party's headquarters had countless applicants, and it instantly became one of the top organizations in the Cloud Tower. Of course, that was impossible. Reality would always develop in the opposite of what one would expect. Even though the advertisements for the great industrial party were everywhere, there were still 0 applicants yesterday afternoon. Perhaps it was because the mages were as cautious as usual Or perhaps it was because the great industrial party's past notoriety left too deep an impression on people. However, there was now an unwelcome additional supervisor who took the initiative to visit us. I'll keep an eye on you. Don't misunderstand. This wasn't a confession of love. This was a police officer's righteous roar at a suspect. She was determined to punish the criminal no matter the cost. And so, the great industrial party, which had very few members, actually gained a permanent internal supervisor. This was a treatment that only large organizations with more than 1,000 members could receive. Since we were a subordinate organization of the Mystical Blade, it was impossible for us to refuse the great industrial party's supervisor. And now, the mage organization Great Industrial Party. Fine, I knew that this sounded quite awkward. Yep, the only business under this great industrial party was this Thorn Garden shop, which was why she kept checking the accounts every day. How could that be? As a qualified businessman who pursued profit as his goal, which was destined to be illegal, he would need at least 3 sets of account books. One set was for people to check after paying taxes, one set was for himself to read, and one set was for when he was forced to give up his pawn to save his riches. According to the Mage Country's laws, the Mage Country could levy a 10% tax on any transaction within the country. This was quite a hefty tax, and it was common for private transactions to be done very carefully to avoid taxes. We were quite good at making fake accounts, but what? She took the workshop's order and compared it to our inventory and directly checked the amount that wasn't in our warehouse. That's completely against the most basic tax laws. Do you really think that fake accounts are legal? Of course. Is there any merchant in the world who doesn't fake accounts? At the very least, the royalty doesn't need to. Heloise thought about it for a long while, but she still couldn't remember a single merchant in her long life who didn't fake accounts. In the end, she hesitantly told me what she remembered. At the very least, back when she was still a princess, the royalty's subordinate merchants seemed to be quite honest. That's because they don't need to pay taxes at all. The tax will also go into their pockets as a subsidy. My angry roar echoed in the room. No matter which world I was in, a state-owned enterprise or a government background was a good way to earn money. In terms of taxes, financing, credit, and so on, it was definitely not something that an independent private company could compare to. But that was not the point. There are 12 types of goods that aren't on the tax return list, and there are at least 400 transactions that aren't recorded in the account book. In less than a week, he has evaded more than 50,000 gold coins in taxes. The false accounting is flawless, and there are no flaws on the paper. I even suspect that he was born into a merchant family. Looking at the unpaid taxes of 52,452 gold coins on the form, there was also an expected fine of more than 20,000 gold coins. My heart was bleeding. This was all my hard-earned money. Big mistake. Humph. Are you indirectly praising your inspection ability? This was the most advanced accounting technique in the world. Unfortunately, I was still exposed. If I had known earlier that she would go crazy and check the inventory for an entire day, I would have long since turned hostile and refused to let her in. No, I'm telling the truth. Although your accounting form is simple, the mathematical skills involved are probably far beyond the level of an ordinary mage. I'm even beginning to suspect that you're a professional counterfeiter. That's precisely why I had to use unconventional methods in order to discover your problem. So you're saying that I'm investigating you not because there's a problem with you, but rather because there's definitely a problem with you. So no matter what, I'm going to investigate to the end. Do you know that you're violating the most basic code of conduct for law enforcers? Presumption of innocence. Even though Cher had a blank expression and didn't seem to know anything about this, and even though this didn't have much to do with me, I still mysteriously felt displeased to see a law enforcer acting so recklessly, causing me to keep a stern expression. Asterisk crack. Asterisk what surprised me was that Cher directly tore apart the tax return form and instantly threw it everywhere. The next instant, the ground was covered in shredded paper. I didn't intend to threaten you. I just wanted to ask you something. Please answer me honestly. What is it? Since she had spent the entire day trying to find out what hurt me, what she wanted to ask would definitely not be a small matter. However, the most important thing right now was, Why are you still standing there in a daze? Hurry up and help me destroy the evidence and repack the warehouse. Also, mess up the order of the goods and redo the accounting. If I get caught again, I'll deduct the fine from your wages. Yep, I should first take care of the aftermath in order to avoid being caught again in the same situation. As for Cher's condescending expression, I ignored it. And then, since you're asking so sincerely, I'll listen to you. After hesitating for quite a while, Cher grit her teeth and finally asked, "Are you my biological grandfather?" Asterisk, pft. Asterisk, the tea in the mouths of the spectators turned into fountains. Even the silly cat knocked over her milk bowl. I was so scared that my soul almost left my body. Just what was going on here? Due to a certain female mage's astonishing revelation, everyone was thrown into a complete mess. It took 10 minutes for the room to be cleaned up. During this entire process, my mind was completely blank. Damn it, did someone come to my door and ask for alimony? Or was I being blackmailed? Why did someone suddenly hug my leg and call me father? I didn't participate in any elections. This doesn't seem right. I don't even have a wife. So why did a granddaughter suddenly pop up? Cher Aaron, human, at least in appearance, gold rank. Her exact age was unknown. She was born as a rogue mage and specialized in prophecy and runic magic. If one only looked at her information, she didn't have any special background. She was already a silver-ranked mage when she arrived in Barty. She could be considered a classic example of a self-reliant mage. I didn't believe that a woman like her would need to recognize a traitor as her father and use such a thing to improve her relationship with Barty. In fact, when she asked that question, she had a disgusted expression, as if she was saying, "How could my relative be this person?" This was still fresh in my memory. Soon, her explanation made it even harder for them to accept it. According to where she was born, she was a citizen of Barty. However, she was actually an orphan who was taught magic by dragon. Later, she became an adventurer in the Barty Empire. However, when Orlos became an official mage, a large number of adventurer teams were forcefully absorbed into the Barty Empire. In the end, she chose to leave. I think it's been more than 20 years since the Barty Empire became an official mage. In that case, Madame Cher is at least 4. As expected of my disciple, she was incredibly perceptive. She immediately found the main point that I was concerned about, and even said it first. However, it seemed that Shueli's movements were also quite fast. Her kick landed squarely on the other party's ankle. She was fast, accurate, and ruthless. Just looking at it made one think that she was actually a monk. Looking at the unlucky Cohen who was crying out in pain after being stepped on, I secretly rejoiced at the fact that my mouth was a step too slow. Then, I sighed at how inexperienced this brat was. Even if he had doubts, he shouldn't say it out loud. Isn't that just courting death? Even a female mage is still a woman. Didn't you see that I've never talked to Heloise, Amelia, and the others about age? That's just suicidal, right? Amelia's age should be in the 3 digits. If she's the princess of the Elven Empire, could she be in the 5 digits? She's so old. It hurts. Silly cat, stop scratching me. Damn it, I'm suicidal. I forgot to pay attention to our connection. This time, it wasn't the usual playful tearing. Cher's claws had even been metallized. Heloise didn't hold back at all. I felt a burning pain on my nose. I looked in the mirror at the 8 bloody claw marks on my face, as well as the silly cat who was still clawing at my head. I began to seriously consider how I was going to meet people tomorrow. Perhaps it was time to make a cat skin bib. I was raised by that 3-headed dragon when I could remember. She taught me everything, but she never told me who I was or if I had any relatives. Cher seemed to have lost her patience for idle chatter as she directly told me about her past. 3-headed dragon? Raised you? That's almost legendary. You're so lucky. You actually believed it? I told others later, but they didn't believe me. They said that 3-headed dragons didn't exist in the world, and that I only saw them in my dreams. Evelyn obviously existed. From a certain standpoint, Evelyn is my mother. Cher's name, which I had just seen not long ago, caused me to instinctively retract my attitude of thinking that I was lucky. A chill ran down my spine, making me uncomfortable. My premonitions of misfortune were always incredibly accurate. This time, I was afraid that I would truly be in trouble. I'm a fate weaver. The moment Cher opened her mouth, everyone nearby instinctively took a step back. Cher could only smile wryly as she helplessly shook her head. It seemed that she was already used to such treatment. This wasn't because my subordinates were cowardly, but rather because the Fate Weaver job class had such a frightening reputation. The Celestial Tower's experience proved that prophecies were completely unreliable. Changing one's fate would only result in greater misfortune. This was a basic rule that the god of fate had revealed to mortals. However, as mages who feared nothing, how could they possibly submit to fate? And so, this abnormally special job class, Fate Weaver, was born. As a high-level job class that was above the gold rank, the Fate Weaver job class basically had zero requirements to advance. Yep, as long as a mage reached the peak of the silver rank, they would be able to advance into the Fate Weaver job class. As for the success rate, there was a saying that it wasn't that this job class had no requirements, but rather that it had chosen those who could advance into the Fate Weaver job class from the very start. After all, it was impossible for those who weren't chosen to advance into the Fate Weaver job class, so there was no need for any additional requirements. The Fate Weaver job class was so rare that there were no more than 10 of them in the entire continent. It was only natural that the Fate Weaver job class was favored by the god of fate, Catio. The Fate Weaver job class wasn't a powerful combat job class, and it wouldn't be of any help to casting spells. However, it had two basic abilities. The first ability was to see through an object's past and future, and the second ability was to change the object's future fate. However, since changing the object's fate would only make the object's fate worse, even if the Fate Weaver used this ability out of kindness, such as trying to change someone's fate that was about to die, it would only make that person's death worse. That was why the Fate Weaver job class had another name, Summoner of Misfortune. From a certain standpoint, the Fate Weaver job class was truly vicious in that whoever it looked at would become unlucky, and whoever it looked at would become pregnant, and whoever would become even more unlucky. Our abilities aren't as mystical as the legends make them out to be. Prophecy abilities are no longer as mystical as they were in ancient times. Even if I use my fate gaze at full power, I'll only be able to see what will happen to an inanimate object within 1 minute. Rather than calling it a prophecy, it's more like a prediction, and our ability to weave fate threads will only bring about negative consequences. That's why we usually don't use our abilities. I had done some research on prophecy and fate magic before, although I hadn't learned anything, so I knew the basics. Stargazers would often trip over the rocks they were stepping on. The more something was related to them, the more difficult it would be to predict it. However, it was publicly acknowledged that this job class was definitely not to be trifled with. It definitely wasn't as useless as she made it out to be. After all, the second-ranked member of the Calamity rankings, the Misfortune Goddess, Ein, was the most famous Fate Weaver in the world. And after the god of fate, Catio, used that god-ranked forbidden spell to transform his divine power into a net that covered the entire mortal plane, the lines of fate should have been thrown into chaos. Prophecy magic should have been rendered useless, so perhaps we could relax a little. Direct prophecy magic is no longer usable. Perhaps we really are the god of fate's favored children. Now, we can actually borrow the power of fate from the divine power net. My power is much stronger than before. Although it's still quite difficult to predict the fate of living creatures, it's quite easy to summon misfortune for them. All I need to do is change the fate threads. All right then, this time, even I wanted to run away. Catio's gift is the god of fate's favor for us. He can allow us to bypass all restrictions and directly ask him for an answer. However, we can only do this once in our lives. She paused for a moment. Her tone was rather strange, and her expression was rather unnatural as she looked at me. In the end, there was even more expectation in her eyes. While I was at my most confused, I used this gift. Where's my family? And he told me, the Cloud Tower is waiting for the Lord of the Night. Your Highness Roland, are you my grandfather? No, I'm your father. And then, everyone was astonished. I was so proud of myself that I wanted to laugh out loud, but a dark, ominous aura suddenly gathered in front of me, causing me to recall who this person was. It seemed that I had gone too far. Don't take it so seriously. I was just joking a joke. A hilarious joke. Have you watched Star Wars before? I highly recommend it. It's really amazing. I especially like this line. All right then. After the silly cat's desperate biting and nearly choking to death on cold water for 3 consecutive days, I learned that some jokes shouldn't be made. Chapter 305. My memory was far more incomplete than I had expected. Since the diary didn't even have any information about me, it probably wasn't a good thing. Forgetting was my own choice. How does it feel to suddenly become a father? Does it feel good? It's complicated. Also, if you purposefully use the word father again, I'll make you into ammunition for my next experiment. I smiled, nodded, and completely accepted Heloise's taunt. Then, I threw out my own threat. However, seeing how she didn't seem to care at all, I knew that such a common punishment wouldn't be enough to scare her. The common punishment in your family is to throw them into an engineering cannon as explosives. Beifong, I'll be careful. There won't be a next time. I nodded in satisfaction. As expected, threats didn't need to be new. It would be fine as long as they were scary enough. For a certain banshee queen who was becoming more and more accustomed to her cat form, a saint-rank beast tamer would definitely be a mega enemy. Fortunately, Beifong still had some basic morals. At the very least, I didn't receive any complaints about him using force. But, to be honest, I felt rather complex when faced with Heloise's intentionally twisted teasing. First of all, I didn't even know if she was my descendant. After all, there were many methods of determining family relationships in this world. However, most of them wouldn't be useful this time. The final result would definitely be unreliable. To determine if 2 people were related by blood, apart from the completely unreliable divination and prophecy magic, one would have to start from the physical body. No matter if it was the secrets of blood or witchcraft that traced the origin of souls, they all required a part of the physical body as the source. But after this revival, my physical body had been completely reconstructed. Although my physical appearance was exactly the same as before, and I looked quite human, I was likely no longer human inside. System? As expected, this system was completely unreliable at critical moments. However, as the Weaver of Fate, Cher had her own opinion on this. I can tell that your fate is related to the source of my birth. Even if you're not my ancestor, you're still deeply connected to my ancestor. Besides, with Renee and Donglan as precedents, even if she was indeed related to me by blood, that didn't mean that she was my descendant. After all, I still had a younger brother who gave me quite a headache. This has nothing to do with me. Second brother Cavendish said it. All right then. Looking at Renee's delighted expression, I didn't know what to say anymore. Are you happy? Yes, of course. If she's your descendant, big brother Roland, isn't that also my relative? Other than little sister Grimm, I have another family member. Little sister Grimm? Sister Glena, right? Only then did I recall that perhaps it was because the Mist descendants had a difficult fate. No matter if it was Glena or Renee, they both fit the criteria of being orphans. Yet, the 2 of them just happened to have a poor relationship. Fine, from a certain standpoint, neither of them could be considered normal people. This was especially true for Glena, who was a strange person who was difficult to get along with. By the way, how's Glena doing? It's going well. Now that the north and east have calmed down, there's nothing to worry about. The Sluweir Kingdom's recovery is in the best condition. At the very least, she was complaining in her letter 2 days ago, saying that she wanted to go out and play. Little Sister Grimm's workload is much easier than ours. How could we give her such an opportunity? Although Sluweir had suffered many losses in the Northern War, it had a strong foundation and was able to recover very quickly after it recovered. Sluweir was originally an important trading country, and it was also able to do business with elves and new beastmen, so it recovered very quickly after it reopened its trade routes. Donglan, on the other hand, was limited by its population and basic industries. Apart from basic military and defense activities, it would be quite difficult for the country to devote all of its resources to spring plowing. That was why even though Renee and Glena were both rulers of a country, There was actually a huge difference in difficulty between them. Of course, if one looked at military affairs, it would be the complete opposite. As my most important base in the Northlands, as well as the headquarters of the Church of Law, Donglan's military strength was already at the forefront of the Northlands despite its small size. However, it was also because of Donglan's emphasis on military development that even the Royal Knight Squadron had to participate in the spring plowing. Sluir is still fine, but Donglan's development seems to be rather abnormal. The military and military industries take up far too much of the country, and the land isn't suitable for agricultural development. I hope that Amelia's new crops will have a great harvest this year. Otherwise, I'll have to think of ways to scam money from her. Considering the current situation, I was a little worried. Those domain lords had their own expectations and ambitions. If Renee continued to wander about outside, there would be a lot of trouble if something happened in the country. Why don't you just go back and support the overall situation? I have more than enough manpower here. Although Renee hadn't become queen yet, everyone knew that she was already the ruler of a country. It was evident that she wasn't the type of person who would obediently sit in the royal palace. This time, she came here with the Borealis under the pretext of supporting us. If I go back, won't I just be a rubber stamp? So annoying. Pouting. Renee had a nonchalant expression on her face. My head hurt even more. In a way, she wasn't wrong. The military was taken over by my red hunting hounds, and the political affairs were taken care of by Kelly. Furthermore, the Church of Law was already beginning to surpass the authority of the royal family. From a different perspective, we were no different from traders who wanted to take control of an orphan daughter of the royal family. Fine, forget it. Do whatever you want. But here, yeah, it's boring. I don't understand those mages stuff, so I intend to say goodbye to you. Goodbye? Where are you going? The Forest of Dreams or the Ottoman Empire? Although she still had a mischievous smile on her face, it was easy to understand just from the beginning. There was no need to explain the rest in detail. Judging from her calm tone, she had already made up her mind and was only informing me. Yep, it's both practical combat training and to earn some justice points. There are many treasures that I'm interested in. Since the rules were set, they couldn't be easily changed. Renee, who had always followed me, naturally knew just how important justice points were. Since she wanted to become stronger, she was obviously quite interested in justice points. She also knew that this was probably the best time to earn justice points and strengthen herself. Many of the items that I could exchange for were unique. If I wanted them, I would naturally need to act quickly. According to the latest news from the Forest of Dreams, many people had already reached the front lines in the Forest of Dreams, including many powerful hermits. However, Renee's plans weren't so simple. If you need manpower, just say so. If there's nothing else, I'll take the entire Silver Cross Squadron with me, as well as those brats from the Aurora Knight Squadron. It'll be too much of a waste to have them work as shop assistants in the Cloud Tower. I've already bought 5,000 sets of armlets. I'll just treat it as using them for my personal use. It was obvious that she had planned this farewell beforehand. She intended to go to the battlefield. Not only would she be able to train herself, she would also be able to train her troops. In fact, she would even be able to help her knight subordinates obtain justice points together to help them grow stronger. Not only that, she had chosen to lead her own tribe and knight subordinates to grow together and overcome the difficulties together. The light of the spring sun shone through the window as the smiling female knight waved goodbye to me. For some inexplicable reason, I felt as if I had experienced this scene before. Her silver armor gleamed with a thick metallic sheen. Her handsome face had long since lost its former timidity and hesitation. Her smile wasn't forced at all, and the silver Roland's sacred sword at her waist was glowing with a resolute will. When I woke up from my daze, I discovered that so much time had passed. Unbeknownst to me, this girl had already become a warrior capable of fighting on her own. Right? I also brought that flag with me. You don't mind if I use it, right? The famous Dragonslayer princess from the Northlands War was still wearing the tattered Mist War flag on her back. At that moment, I paused in surprise for a moment, but then I understood everything. It was obvious that Renee had long since planned this. She wasn't trying to avoid her responsibilities as the ruler of a country. In fact, she believed that there would be endless calamities in the future, and that it would be meaningless to only defend her own territory. After all, that would be a passive defense. Only by obtaining sufficient power would she be able to overcome the difficulties. And now, it was time for her to obtain fame and power. In this world, even an illusory reputation could transform into actual assistance. In the face of calamities and dangers, the title of a hero would attract countless people's trust and allies. That was why she made a choice. She chose to bring the Knight Squadron to experience the battlefield in advance. She chose to leave my protection and obtain the power to protect herself and her people in the face of life and death. Not only would she establish her own reputation, but she would also inject new history and fame into the Mist war flag, allowing the entire land to see what it meant to be a descendant of the Mist. She knew that it would be impossible for her to directly raise this idea in her own country. As the only royalty, Kelly and many other old ministers would definitely oppose her to the death. That was why she used the excuse of providing support and went to the front lines first. Once she had full control of the situation, she would act first and report later. At this moment, although the girl in front of me still had the same appearance, the timid vase princess of the past had disappeared. The one smiling in the face of the future calamities was now a knight princess who had shouldered the trust of her country and citizens. For a long while, I didn't know what to say. Although she was asking for my opinion, she probably hadn't considered the possibility that I would refuse. Would I refuse? Of course not. Since the young eagle had already matured and was ready to spread its wings and leave the nest, how could I force her to hide under my wings? That would only make her an idiot. You're setting me up. Do you really want to see Sister Kelly nag me to death? Hee, Brother Roland. Is there something you're afraid of? I'm sorry. I'll write her a letter. In that case, you'll approve, right? If you don't approve, you'll just run away. Honestly, there's not a single person who doesn't make me worry. I smiled and shook my head. I felt both gratified and regretful. I like you the most, Brother Roland. Discovering that her request had been approved, the mature female knight instantly thawed like an iceberg and transformed into a shy young girl with a smile as beautiful as a flower. And then, she pounced on me along with my chair. Asterisk pop. Asterisk my cheek felt a slight chill. By the time I reacted, all that was left in front of me was the faint scent of orange perfume and the figure of a beautiful girl who had escaped. I touched the soft sensation on my cheek, as if her red lips were still the same. I didn't know what to say anymore. It was only after a long while that I managed to squeeze out a sentence. This little girl sure is passionate. Sometimes it's gentlemanly to intentionally act dumb when seeing something embarrassing. But sometimes it's quite excessive to intentionally act dumb even though you know what's going on. Little Roland, what kind of person are you? Shut up, Heloise. Otherwise, I'll feed you to Bayphone. Tactical weapons were far too powerful. The silly cat fell silent for a while. But after a while, I couldn't help but ask another question. Am I really being too excessive? Scum, demon, pervert, bastard, gentleman, Roland, Bayphone. All right then, it would seem that our names were changing into adjectives. But since I was only one rank lower than Bayphone in terms of evil, I really needed to reflect on myself. After Renee escaped as if she was hit and run, my emotions, which had been messed up by Cher's death, became even more chaotic, and the silly cat just happened to continue adding more trouble for me. Oni father, Bayphone, Roland, Oni father, Bayphone, Roland, just as I was seriously considering whether or not I should taste her sour cat meat hot pot today and was about to take action, she finally bared her teeth and disappeared into the shadows. After thinking about it for 2 minutes, I turned my attention to something else. Renee is becoming more and more similar to that guy. For some reason, my impression of Renee was becoming more and more similar to that idiot who would do anything for power. But from another perspective, her determination to fight on the battlefield gave me even more warning. Since I've already made all my plans, it's time for me to focus on my own cultivation. After all, in the end, it's all about power. Even Renee has noticed the main point. so I can't fall behind. Once I'm done with all the recent matters, I'll find a place to cultivate and earn some fate points. As long as this place stabilized, the mortal plane would still have a period of stability before the undead emperors could fully descend. Cavendish's overwhelming power level was like a heavy rock weighing down on my heart. 10 years later, no, perhaps only 7 or 8 years later, the undead emperors that would fully descend would all be threats to me. I had already established my foundation and found my own path for the future. All that was left was to persevere on this path and madly fight to earn fate points in order to increase my power level at an extraordinary speed. Right, if I want to enter legend rank, I need to recover at least 3 soul imprints. I can't use holy light and law for now, but this is the country of mages. My undead magic has long since reached a bottleneck, so I should be able to find the corresponding knowledge here. I need to level up my frigid winter earth, and I need all sorts of elemental materials. It seems that I'll have to properly rob an old friend, have a chat with an old friend. Chapter 306. Originally, the Royo Street district was one of the most inconspicuous districts in Arlo. That was because it was also commonly known as the Gnome and Dwarf district. In this land of magic, this place wasn't very popular. Even the land prices here were the lowest. After all, this was the domain of mages. The gnomes and dwarves' engineering products were nothing more than illusionary fireworks in front of mysterious magic. Although they seemed extravagant, they weren't actually that practical. Engineering cannons? Gnome explosives? They're not as powerful as third-circle magic spells, and it's easy to blow yourself up. Most importantly, they're expensive, heavy, and unstable. Gnome harvester armor? A silver ranked can handle a small one, but a large one costs an astronomical price just to get an energy source. They can't be mass-produced, and their practicality is questionable. A gnome's daily necessities series? Bro, you're joking, right? Do you want to try a toilet that can shoot you into the clouds? A gnome's sleeping mask that can roast your brains? Yep, there's also this super cool massage chair that's rumored to double the size of your bones. Forget it. Those things are better for you to kill yourself. For a long period of time, engineering products were viewed as unreliable. Apart from the fact that gnomes and dwarves who specialized in engineering were quite unreliable, it was also because of technical limitations. Without a stable supply of energy, how can there be a stable engineering product? Taking the common sense from the alternate world as an example, a car that would randomly choose from the first gear to the 100th gear with a slight step on the accelerator would not be able to sell. A hairdryer and microwave oven that could jump to tens of thousands of volts at any time was simply a mobile bomb. The gnomes in this world were far too crude when it came to energy production. They would either add fuel or other flammable materials to power them, which would be incredibly difficult to control. They would also use magical items and minerals from magical beasts that contained a certain amount of energy. That would be a huge waste of money. Not only would their energy conversion rate be incredibly low, they would also be difficult to control once they were activated. Their development of energy was a complete mess. It wasn't that the gnomes and dwarves didn't care about energy sources. It was that every natural or ancient energy source had its own unique principles and activation methods. They could only be researched individually. When all the parts were different, how could they possibly create a universal energy engine? Since even the energy supply mechanism and ability engine couldn't be mass-produced, engineering products naturally couldn't be mass-produced either, which meant that there was no basic stability to speak of. The gnomes and dwarves weren't satisfied with such limitations either. Gnome engineering was a typical gnome's way of thinking, or perhaps it should be said that the gnome style was filled with self-abandonment. Since we don't know when it will explode, we might as well make it a bomb that explodes. That's why there are all sorts of goblin explosions. Over time, it even became a mix of goals and methods of pursuing goals. It became a strange worldview that glorifies even more powerful explosions. Since there's no way to limit the power output, I'll think of a way to increase the power output to the maximum. That's how I came up with those deadly goblin rocket launchers and rocket launchers. It should be said that it was all thanks to the dwarves' invention of parachutes that the pilots had the possibility of safely returning to the surface. However, The gnome rocket car competition actually became the most popular competition among the gnome species, which was quite incomprehensible. Danger? What was that? Please call him unpredictable passion. This was indeed a response that fit the gnome style. If it wasn't for the fact that there were explosions in the background and that there were more than 3 digits in the number of deaths every year, perhaps this answer would have been even more convincing. Meanwhile, the dwarves' way of thinking was much more normal. At the very least, they were working hard to make up for their current technology shortcomings. In this process, the dwarves invented gear sets. They attempted to use gear sets to transmit torque, change speed, and change the direction of torque. They controlled the transmission of power and attempted to make an uncontrollable source of power controllable. It was precisely because of the dwarves' use of gear sets and conductors that the dwarves were far more skilled at creating mechas and vehicles than the gnomes. Their mechanical products were also far more detailed. After all, for the gnomes, all squeaky large objects were consumables that brought about passion and explosions. Why would they bother researching such things? However, the gnomes were far superior to the dwarves when it came to things like rocket launchers and all sorts of dangerous inventions related to explosions and speed. However, with current technology, using gear sets that weren't fully developed to control an immeasurable source of power was akin to using a small boat to control a heavy ironclad battleship. Not only was it completely unreliable, even if it succeeded by chance, the investment would far exceed the benefits, and it would be impossible to mass-produce such a thing. The worst part was that even though the dwarves' technology wasn't fully developed yet, they believed that as long as they use it often enough, it would definitely succeed. They created a large number of daily tools that could be used to kill people. The end result was that both gnome and dwarf engineers became synonymous with untrustworthy and uneconomical. However, personally speaking, I felt that the dwarves' methods were slightly more reliable than the gnomes. If they were given another 2,000 or 3,000 years, and if they coincidentally discovered another source of power, perhaps they really would be able to develop a technology similar to the steam civilization. However, with the upcoming calamity, this was obviously impossible. Actually, if the two factions worked together, it was possible for them to develop by leaps and bounds. However, people of the same trade were enemies. Scientists were all stubborn, and it was only natural for researchers who didn't share the same path to view each other as competitors and enemies. It was common for differences in research to escalate into personal conflicts. The gnomes and dwarves had never had a good relationship. Only in a place like Sulphur Mountain City could the two opposing factions put aside their differences and work together. Finally, there was the mysterious creation of the Roland Titan. Even in a place like Sulphur Mountain City, there was no lack of arguments and fights between the two factions. Only when they were prisoners in prison did they manage to reach a temporary agreement. But now, with Olivia's magic box, there would be a stable energy source. The engineers would be able to put aside their prejudices and disagreements and focus their attention on the more important development and utilization. Every change in power represents a new industrial revolution. And this time, Olivia's magic box will probably bring about the world's first industrial revolution. Although the core of Olivia's magic box was the miracle alchemist Olivia's energy conservation and circulation magic array, it was the master engineers led by Tim Ladd who made it work stably. The latest version of Olivia's magic box 8. 1 inch had even surpassed the previous version in the game's history, which was why all sorts of engineering products were being developed at an exponential rate. Not only did Golden Tooth, Millhouse, and the other gnome and dwarf engineers work hard, Tim Ladd's information also contained the secrets and knowledge of the ancient species. This was a miraculous creation that was born out of necessity. If it wasn't for the fact that the ancient species was facing a crisis of despair, it was likely that Tim Ladd, who was the last member of the ancient species in the game's history, wouldn't have handed over his treasures. And now, Royo Street District had become the great industrial party's personal territory after a series of mergers and hiring. Yep, mergers and acquisitions. Basically, I was going to buy his entire shop, and then his employees would naturally become mine. Then, I would turn the shop into a factory. Although it would cost quite a bit, I've been earning quite a bit recently. Plus, I had saved up quite a bit, so I didn't feel too much pressure. There were plenty of gnome, dwarf, and dwarf engineers trying to make a living in the mage country. However, the most popular businesses in the mage country were obviously smithing, alchemy, and enchantment. Smithing and engineering were closely related, and the mage country lacked manpower. I also welcomed alchemists. For the gnomes and dwarves, engineering was their daily life. Even the gnome master alchemists were quite skilled in engineering, so it would be quite easy for them to work for an archmage with such high technology. No, it should be said that the gnomes and dwarves were incredibly sensitive to the new generation's changes and new technologies. They had already gone crazy over my technology. What infuriated them the most was the fact that this historical invention wasn't one of their own species' creations. They were all holding their breaths. In fact, when I mentioned that Thorngarden was hiring engineers and alchemists, and that I would be offering a 10-year long-term employment contract, many top-level gnome enchanters and dwarven alchemists volunteered to join us. In fact, there was even a myth-rank gnome archmage named Cromwell Manastorm, who was an expert in the field of magical marionette creation. He pitifully came to apply for the job with his apprentice-level engineering certificate. Actually, I've always wanted to be an engineer. Hey, don't go. I can work for you while researching new technologies. Don't you want to see the combination of runic magic puppets and engineering? That's definitely the scariest, cutest little thing in all of history. The dwarf archmage's high-pitched voice echoed in the room, and dangerous bright purple mana waves caused the room to rumble. I even suspected that if I refused him, he would directly destroy the entire room. Fine, sign this 10-year employment contract. You're also Roland's subordinate. Hey, you're not even going to look at it? You trust me too much. Haha, as long as you give me that technology, I'm even willing to give up all of my assets. It's only 10 years of work. It's nothing. Besides, I've already heard about your deeds for my tribe. I'm looking forward to serving you. The white-bearded old man had a proud smile on his face, as if we were the ones signing the contract. And this wasn't the first archmage to express goodwill to me. However, what was surprising was that the vast majority of archmages that came into contact with me at this time weren't human archmages. I had enough manpower, funds, and technology, so the construction of buildings here was quite swift. Royo Street was now my territory. Of course, the side effect was that it would be quite difficult for other mages to find these foreign species to work for them. They could only look for human smiths and alchemists. Doing too much would naturally attract hostile gazes, but why would I care? The next batch of products? The Interstellar Gunner mechas and Sith Warrior mechas should be ready already, right? Let's start selling them. Right, it's time to speed things up. Each mecha must be worth 10 justice points before they can be sold. Perhaps the amount isn't much, but I should at least force them to think of a way to get it. But sometimes, things wouldn't develop so smoothly. I'm really sorry, but I'm afraid that we don't have enough money to simultaneously purchase and manufacture so many production lines. How is that possible? Thorngarden's profits are quite high, right? The purchase of real estate is also within our expectations. So how could we not have enough money? Did you all miscalculate? You've already signed so many master engineers and archmages for 10-year contracts. Just the relocation fees and down payments are no small sum. It's over budget. Besides, my lord, you suddenly have 4 research projects, especially that Roland 7 project. It's ridiculous how much money you're burning every day. Everyone in the finance department thinks that it's best for you to stop some of your research projects. I didn't know what to say as I looked at the cowardly young accountant who had been pushed out here to take the blame for his colleagues. Although I could think of other ways to transfer funds from other sources, that would definitely slow down the progress. I hesitated for a moment, but in the end, I still came up with a devious idea to first obtain some funds. How about we do something a little more devious? After I told him my plan, the atmosphere cooled down for a while. I heard that robbing and scamming will cause you to lose the power of law, right? You're hearing this, I smiled proudly. We're not robbing or scamming. Do you think those unskilled jobs can make as much or as fast as us? Chapter 307. Did you buy it? When this greeting spread among the mages, no one could have predicted what would happen. I had a dream yesterday. I dreamed that my ancestors sent me a message. This time it's definitely going to be red, purple, black, and white. Did that sound rather difficult to understand? Each color represented a choice. This was nothing more than an alternative combination of numbers, which was quite easy to understand. Yes, this was the lottery. Apart from some random archmage who didn't know how to play the game. Who else would think of selling the lottery in a magical fantasy world to make money? And this brat who received a message from his ancestor was just like a lottery addict who received his deceased grandfather's relic and decided to gamble his entire fortune on a single number. Of course, compared to all sorts of insider trading, the winner of the lottery in a certain dimension might even be the organizer of the lottery. I was quite kind, so I probably thought of a way to swindle 30% of the total prize money. What? Not kind. Actually, compared to some of my peers, I was already quite kind. And the winner wouldn't just receive gold coins. After all, there were quite a few mages who didn't lack money. Precious magical ingredients, limited edition items from Thorn Garden, justice points, and even the chance to inherit the legacy of an emblematic truth-level archmage were all invested into the prize pool. Naturally, the mages were unable to maintain their composure. The winning rate of the previous few lotteries was also deliberately adjusted. Quite a number of people won the consolation prize, the limited edition Iron Horse number 8. The winners happily rode their new mount, nicknamed Red Lightning, and raced around, driving some enthusiasts into a frenzy. What was Red Lightning? It was a modified version of Iron Horse number 7 with just a layer of red paint. What? Even if the upgraded version was quite a scam, I was actually quite kind. At the very least, I didn't make it seem like changing the color of the Iron Horse's shell was a limited edition, and I even changed its name. Fine then, I was a scammer. Were there any successful merchants in this day and age who weren't scammers? At the very least, I provided entertainment and made money, which also made enthusiasts happy. And some things would be difficult to stop once they started. This was especially true for the simple locals. Once they started buying, how could they possibly stop? Once they really fell for the trap, the prize money became secondary. The excitement and anticipation of winning the lottery was the most fascinating part. And this was only the beginning. The more I used the same kind of excitement, the more numb I would become. I would need to constantly introduce new projects. Who do you think will win this time? Is it the Goldtooth Brothers' Super Apollo or the Mana Storm Brothers' Crazy Gear 07? I think it should be the same as last time. Both sides will explode into the sky before they reach the end. Damn it, who could have won the last time? I bet on the dwarf, and I ended up losing a lot of money. You guys don't know the temperament of those engineers at all. Last time, I bet that both sides would not reach the finish line. That's 3 times the odds. But it's a pity that I'm still too conservative. Otherwise, I could earn more. F***CK. You've already crushed such a weird result. What's there to be conservative about? I was actually very hesitant at that time. At that time, I should have bet that both parties would not walk half the distance. That's 9 times the odds. Impressive. Next time, we'll follow you to buy. By the way, did you hear? No one made it to the finish line this time. The odds are now 1 o'clock. Hey, what a scam. But it seems like I can only press it there. Are you guys stupid? I heard that both sides were so angry that they spent a lot of effort to improve it. Also, Blue Tower's Iron Horse is participating. Do you think no one will make it to the finish line? How come I've never heard of this before? What a scam. The organizers are so sly. Gnome versus Gnome. I have to say, the card with the same name is really a scam, was the most popular competition recently. Gnome engineers and gnome engineers would assemble all sorts of racing cars and race over obstacles. At the same time, both sides could interfere with each other. It was common for them to throw rockets and mini bombs at each other, and whichever side reached first would win. But since both sides fought for real at the end of the last competition, they were both blown up into the sky. Many people were dissatisfied with the lack of a victor, so this time they joined the Iron Horse team. Although their equipment was far slower than the engineers' standard Iron Horses, as long as the other engineers self-destructed and blew each other up along the way, the Iron Horse team would naturally become the sole champion. That was why after the news spread, the Iron Horse team actually became the hottest topic of discussion. But what are the odds like? What's the best way to earn the most? The gnomes are the least favored. They'll blow up at least a few times along the way. The most favored team is Blue Tower's Iron Horse team. If they win, the odds are too low. We'll basically be working for them this time. All right, give Golden Tooth and the others the newest stabilizer engine and loosen up the gears for Mana Storm. This time, the gnomes will be the winner, right? Is the new project ready? Of course. Gnomes versus Dwarves 2. Hot air balloon airship versus battle helicopter. It's about to go on sale. Yep, do more publicity for me. Sell more tickets for the same season. Make preparations to scam money. Sell tickets. But remember that only gold and above can be pilots. According to the way they play, those who aren't strong enough will be killed sooner or later. Is there any news from the other mage organizations? Every time the tickets for the Iron Horse team, which were only available for luxury class seats and above, were made into special cards for raffle sales. There was also a promotion where anyone who bought a set of these cards would receive a free Iron Horse. Of course, since 2 of the numbered cards didn't even have 2 digits, this lucky draw game, which seemed like anyone who bought a high-class ticket actually hadn't given out many free prizes yet. There are some mage organizations that have opinions about this competition, but there's basically no one who's protesting. After all, there's too little entertainment in this world, and everyone's too free. Even those who aren't participating in the competition can join in on the fun. Still, there are quite a few who want to participate, but they want to be able to use their own mounts, such as phantom horses or hellwalkers. Let them participate next time. I've already prepared the advertising slogan, Mage Rangers who are avenging the failed Blue Tower. But we need to test them beforehand. We need to test their speed and natural talent abilities first. Don't create another Dragon Knight or Frost Giant, or else there'll be no profit at all. The first few rounds allowed the other participants to participate freely. This continued until a top-level summoner participated and summoned a flying semi-dragon that flattened the gnome's flying car, and a frost giant kicked the gnome pilot away. Magic storm in the sky. Don't use your stinky boots to kick gnomes, and don't kick gnome mechas away. In order to make the competition less suspenseful, the competition began limiting the number of participants and announcing all the participants' information beforehand. But no matter who wins, will be the ones who make the most profit in the end. From a certain standpoint, this was indeed a very problematic way of manipulating the match. Since they were already shamelessly gambling, it didn't seem like it would be a big deal if they were shamelessly fixing the match. But based on my usual understanding, good things wouldn't last long. The Mystical Blades Tax Department is here again. They want to audit our accounts. Tisk, these scavenger birds have such sharp noses. Tell them that this isn't under their jurisdiction. This isn't a trading event, but an organized competition. As for those small bets, the Mage Country doesn't have a gambling tax yet, right? Tell them that they'll collect it after the law is passed. Okay, but what about Milady? Milady? Who? Lady Cher. This time, she's leading the team again. As expected, my daughter was such a waste of money. It had only been a few days, but she was already siding with an outsider. Wait a moment. Who said that she was my daughter? This was still unknown. Unknown. She's not my family's Milady, and I don't have a daughter. How am I supposed to live like this? I'm not even married yet. What the spreads? That little girl? Just let her wait outside. Suddenly, that brat had a rather strange expression as he looked at me. Then, I heard a light cough behind me that sounded quite familiar. Cough. I'm relieved that you think like that. Come, everyone, let's audit the accounts together. Let's first check Thorn Garden's transaction tax. Be careful. The owner of this shop is incredibly sly. Just looking at the accounts won't work. Let's start with the storeroom first. The blue-haired girl started angrily giving orders to her companions. It would seem that I was going to lose money again. No, I couldn't give up yet. That girl might seem tough, but she was actually quite soft-hearted. Perhaps it would be useful to ask her for help. Wait, my good daughter, it's not easy for Daddy to earn some money. At the very least, leave some money for retirement. At this moment, everyone was astonished at how shameless a certain someone was. Meanwhile, the silly cat that had brought Harloise here with her was laughing so hard that she was rolling around on the ground. Thanks to all the enthusiastic individuals helping me out, falling into my trap, my fundraising became incredibly smooth. Of course, there were some side effects, such as my reputation becoming even stranger. What was my reputation? Was it edible? I was truly impressed by this alternate dimension that lacked entertainment. Even the most experienced and knowledgeable mages had rather simple and boring daily lives. In the face of certain temptations, it was actually quite easy to scam them due to their lack of control over money. In the end, when I did some quick calculations, I actually made more money than Thorngarden. Of course, if I made money, I would naturally have to spend it. As long as I made money worth it, the treasures of an archmage that was several hundred years old wouldn't be any inferior to the treasures of a dragon. I was quite tempted by this. As a mage, the most attractive thing to me was obviously the secrets of magic. Of course, since I specialized in a rather unorthodox direction, it would naturally cause some controversy. You want to make a deal with the Sword of Order's subordinate organization, the Soul Ghost Association? Their reputation is absolutely terrible. They're an organization entirely made up of undead mages. Grave robbing and other such things are as common as eating a meal for them. Aren't you afraid that your reputation will be affected? Can my reputation be worse than Yongye's? This single sentence stopped everyone else from complaining. I looked at the information that the black-robe mages left behind with satisfaction. From a certain standpoint, although Heloise had taught me the basics of undead magic, most of my undead magic was still incomplete and self-taught. My undead magic wasn't on the same path as these ghosts in the shadows who had organized their research. Comparing my undead magic with them was quite beneficial. Speaking of which, if it wasn't for Yongye's reputation, these undead mages who had no moral limits would never have agreed to such an equivalent exchange method that they despised. Even if they had obediently agreed to a trade, they wouldn't have given me such valuable information. A large amount of undead magic information was placed in front of me. Many of them were rare and exclusive recipes. Although I still didn't know how to repair undead magic soul imprints, this information was more than enough to make up for my lack of knowledge and give me plenty of inspiration. Amelia has already surpassed me. The Forest of Dreams and the Wood Spirits are truly enviable. With this information, although I won't be able to create an undead lord at the original sin level, I can still try creating something new. Chapter 308. My fireballs will tear you to shreds. Have a taste of my guns. In Arlo's Glory Arena, a battle between a high-level mage and an archer was underway. Normally speaking, the archer would constantly adjust the distance and angle, making all sorts of fancy dodging moves in search of an opportunity to land a killing blow. However, if the archer was riding an archer, they would have an obvious advantage in mobility and attack frequency. Meanwhile, a high-level mage would often use the exact opposite strategy. They would first cast a large number of defensive spells on themselves, and then summon a bunch of cannon fodder. Only then would they find an opportunity to kill the archer while maintaining a balance of attack and defense. However, this time, it was still an elven ranger versus a mage. The audience was confused. The purple-haired elven ranger wasn't using the elves' usual enchanted longbow. Instead, he was using the dwarven musket that the audience had always looked down upon. His mount wasn't a holy unicorn or a pegasus, either. Instead, it was a rumbling iron horse. The high-level elf wore a black punk leather jacket and a leather hat. He held the front of his horse with one hand and spun in circles at high speed. He jumped, climbed up the wall, stopped suddenly, and stood on his hind legs. His other hand held a silver shotgun. He took advantage of the gaps in the battle to continuously attack his opponent. However, unlike the dwarven musket's low-power lead bullets, this high-quality shotgun covered in silver magic paint and embedded with diamonds shot out colorful magic bullets. The handsome elven ranger seemed to be quite confident. He was also quite calm and composed. His hand would shake from time to time, and the shotgun would automatically reload. The wind caused his hair to flutter in the wind, making him seem even more carefree. This caused the girls in the audience to scream in surprise. However, his opponent wasn't affected at all. The silver-armored mage ignored his opponent's attacks and simply cast spells from his stance. Blizzard, Frostfall, Chain Hailstones, Icicles, and many other high-level AoE spells kept raining down on his opponent. It was as if he was a nouveau riche who had unlimited mana. Meanwhile, his opponent's magical musket would only leave a hole in the wall or a deep hole in the ground. However, when it hit the mage's armor, it would only create dazzling sparks. Meanwhile, the mage's random AoE spells caused the Iron Horse archer to panic. The archer's attack power was definitely not low. The gold-ranked archer Ada could already use these magic guns to perform the magic archery that was unique to the elves. The only reason why his attack was ignored was because the opponent's armor was too ridiculously strong. It was just a silver armor that covered his entire body. The result of being completely sealed was that even his face couldn't be seen. Under the black crystal protective mask was a face that was as calm as ice. The metal shell was flashing with the unique brilliance of mithril, and the magic field on it formed an additional 3 layers of protection. The dazzling dragon crystal in front of his chest emitted terrifying magic waves. Any tycoon who saw this armor would shout, "Where did this tycoon come from?" The silver thorny rose emblem on the back of the power armor undoubtedly indicated that this power armor was Thorngarden's newest product. Rich, capricious. Number 1. Yep, from a certain standpoint, this incredibly strange name was the best explanation for this full set of mithril armor. The built-in energy source was currently providing 3 layers of protection: magic field, ice, and lightning. The thick and heavy mithril armor was the best material for magic. With these 4 layers of protection, it was impossible for Ada's magic bullets to pierce through the armor. He kept saying things like, "We hit the opponent, but he bounced off," or "We didn't hit his armor," which made him quite annoyed. Everyone knew that it was impossible to win if one only defended and didn't attack. Unless something unexpected happened that twisted the situation, Ada, who had recently become quite popular in the arena, would definitely lose. It's over. When the Iron Horse motorcycle slid over a thin layer of ice created by a snowstorm, its tires suddenly skidded. When the motorcycle lost control, an ice prison descended upon it. Ada unhesitatingly raised his hands and surrendered as he was locked onto by Ada's powerful magic. That's 15 consecutive victories. Even the Blood Moon Hunter Ada lost, and it's such a one-sided battle. Isn't this armor a little too ridiculous? In the Cloud City, mages and warriors who loved to fight had their own places of entertainment. It was even rarer to have gambling matches. The ABO Arena was such a place. Every day, countless battles would take place here. Some battles would simply be a competition of strength. Some would be simulations to accumulate practical experience. And some would be teacher-student duels. Of course, there would also be battles where one's life was at stake. However, today's duel was the most common daily gambling match. Both sides would place their bets on items of equal value. Not only would they accumulate combat experience, but they would also gain practical benefits and fame. However, since the arena wasn't suitable for mages, most of the competitors were warriors or rangers. They were either natives of the mage country or the personal guards of certain mages. Ada was the personal guard of a certain high elf prince. He was a rather famous ranger archer back in his hometown. After he obtained the Iron Horse and magic spear from Thorngarden, he swiftly learned how to shoot arrows at high speed. Many opponents who were originally stronger than him were defeated by his high speed and fast-paced attacks. And after he obtained 10 consecutive victories, he met the most difficult opponent of all. This was a mage who wore a full set of mithril mobile armor. This archmage was capable of making dragons seem so poor in front of Ada. Ada didn't need any positioning or defensive magic. All he needed to do was stand there in his heavy mobile armor. Ada's enemies wouldn't be able to break through the armor's defenses. He then slowly chanted his own incantation and acted like a stationary cannon. If he ran out of mana, he could even draw energy from the energy pool. His defense was incredibly high, and his mana was limitless. This archmage was shameless to the extreme. Damn rich guy. Be careful not to be robbed by dragons. The audience was also cheering for this new star. Rich man, was indeed the nickname of this unknown mage. Obviously, the highest spell that he used was only at the pinnacle of the silver tier. However, he managed to defeat many strong opponents, including 2 legendary tier opponents. If Ada's ability to adapt to new technology proved that science and technology were combat strength, then this mage had proved an even more fundamental truth. Those who were rich were the boss. Of course, since this mage was so rich, most people guessed that he was at least a legend-ranked archmage. It was even possible that he was a top-level archmage. When the glittering mage slowly walked into his resting room, he collapsed to the ground. The vent on his chest spewed out a large amount of steam. On the other side, several gnome and gnome engineers had long since prepared for this. They immediately started taking off the helmet's components. When the helmet was taken off, an abnormally young face was revealed. "Cohen, how do you feel?" "That's right, this damn rich guy wasn't some archmage. It was my little acolyte Cohen, a 4-elemental swordcaster who might not even be considered a silver rank. I'm using dragon crystals to replenish my mana. I have an endless supply of mana, but dragon crystals are so precious, don't worry. Just keep playing. Treat it as a chance to practice. As for dragon crystals and mana information, relax, someone's paying for it this time." In a certain world, war was the catalyst for the explosive growth of technology. Only when people were pushed to their limits would they bring out unreliable technologies, and then think of ways to obtain results that could be used for slaughter. Magical engineering was a new discipline that was born out of the fires of war. It was also destined to grow alongside war. When Thorn Garden released new products, all sorts of engineering tools became incredibly popular. For example, the 2 mechas called Star Ranger, Sith Warrior, and Jedi Knight were extremely popular the moment they were released. However, this was unexpected. In fact, we didn't even list them as our main products. After all, although these 2 mechas greatly increased the user's mobility and defense, and they were even equipped with a miniature energy source, they were made of metal, which would have an obvious effect on mana transmission. If it were the 4-elemental swordcasters or magic archers who relied on peripherals to cast magic spells, then they would be able to ignore the interference of magic, but pure mages obviously wouldn't be suited for such a casting environment. However, I still underestimated how rich these mages were. Indeed, current technology was limited, but the wealth of a tycoon was limitless. As long as all the mecha's components were made of top-level materials themselves would have mana. Even if the blueprints were the same, if there was too much of a difference in the quality of the materials, then it would naturally be a completely different creation. Metal affecting magic spells? Wouldn't all enchanted mithril affect magic spells? These were all top-level mithril created by great alchemists. The only difference was that they were slightly more expensive, probably 100 times more expensive than gold of the same weight. Lacking mana amplification materials? Just take out a basket full of dragon crystals. Do you have phoenix feathers or demon hearts wholesale? Do you have the fur of a gigantic wolf king that was only produced in the North Plain? As long as you wanted to, you could even find the dragon eyes of an inferno dragon in the lower plains. Don't you know how to inscribe defensive magic arrays? If a truth-level enchanter were willing to serve you, would you need to inscribe absolute defense, super long-range precise teleportation, or meteor shower, or something? Only a 4th circle spell? You dare to look down on me? The mechas would be too heavy and slow move. Are you joking with me? What about the goblins' rocket backpacks? We could just inscribe a few more anti-gravity magic arrays that would reduce the mecha's weight. We had top-level materials anyways, right? Don't forget to hire elven smiths to do some more work. I want angel wings on the helmet, and the mechas should be the most popular steampunk style. I want 2 volcanoes on the mecha's shoulders and illusions that spew out flames at regular intervals. How cool would that be? I also want an eye patch with 3 red, glowing emeralds. I want an evil dragon's eye. All right then. Apart from the last mage whose request made me doubt his sense of aesthetics, and Shinibu, the other archmages were quite reliable. They were all aiming for practical combat effects and survival. The most important thing was that they had money and had many years of savings. they discovered that it was highly likely that they would have to go onto the battlefield soon and face opponents that they weren't confident in defeating. Yet, they valued their own lives, so of course they were willing to spend money to save their own lives. After doing some calculations, I unhesitatingly gave the job of making the mechas to be done by others, while I personally took charge of the most profitable part, the custom-made mechas. However, the prerequisite for long-term business deals was that you would get what you paid for. High-priced mechas had to be of the same quality as high-priced mechas. If the archmages wanted to continue spending money at all costs, and even continuously invest in mechas, they would at least have to prove that the quality of their mechas was worth the price. That was how the novice Cohen came to where the rich, willful mecha number 1 went on stage for the competition. There were many top-level mages watching the competition. In fact, there were even some top-level mages who personally went on stage to test the true defensive capabilities of this priceless golden armor. After learning that the owner of this mecha was a novice who had only been in contact with magic for less than 2 years, he unhesitatingly increased his investment by more than 3 times. He wanted to ensure that his own custom-made mechas would surpass this mecha number 1. Actually, this made me heave a sigh of relief. Otherwise, I would have to think a way to make up for the lack of materials. Where would the lack of materials come from? I hadn't even started custom making yet, had I? Back in the olden days, tailors would always have an unspoken rule when buying materials to make clothes. When buying materials to make a custom-made cucumber, each roll of cloth would be slightly more than what the tailor expected. Then, as long as they made a few more pieces, the tailor would mysteriously have an extra piece of cloth for themselves. I didn't have any top-level magic materials here. This willful mecha number 1 was made from the scraps from all the orders that I had received. If I didn't receive more orders in the future, this would be quite a large hole. I gave Cohen a few words of encouragement and told him to continue accumulating combat experience here, while continuing to show off the power and combat strength of the economic garden. He would also be able to test out the mechas. I couldn't help but sigh. Mechas are far more useful than expected. Even the inventor can't predict what his creation will be like in the end. I originally thought that this was nonsense, but I never thought that I would actually see it one day. Whenever I thought about how, due to my butterfly effect, top-level mages would be armed to the teeth on the battlefield in the future, transforming these weak firepower points that were protected by their comrades into impenetrable mobile turrets. Even the shadow assassins wouldn't be able to kill the forbidden spell mages one by one. I felt that history might have already taken a different path. When the time comes, we'll be facing a group of demons wielding ancient great swords and evil gods riding gigantic beasts, while we'll be facing archmages wearing mechas, archers riding motorcycles, taurens with heavy cannons, and zombies with electric saws. If we fight as a team, I just feel like something's wrong. After I left the arena, my work wasn't over yet. I had unknowingly become the largest arms dealer in the Cloud Tower, but I still had another project that I needed to check on. But this time, it wasn't a place where I could do it openly. We traveled for more than 2 hours in a horse carriage, crossing several mountains and rivers. The sky was almost dark when we finally arrived at a graveyard on the outskirts of the city. That was our destination. The moment dusk arrived, a chilly wind blew through the mountains, causing the surrounding trees to shake as if they were demons. Our horses seemed to be possessed by something as they collapsed to the ground, unwilling to move. Sigh. Every time we arrive here, we can only move on our own. No wonder the hell demons like this place so much. The negative energy here is comparable to the undead plains. It would be strange if the corpses here weren't haunted. Judging from the environment here, these corpses are probably the result of a failed experiment. As a half-undead creature, Heloise would always be especially spirited whenever she came here. A black cat would appear and disappear in the shadows in such a remote and desolate area, making it seem like something out of a ghost story. Look over there. It's so remote, but there's actually a farm here. It must be the hell demons' hidden scouts. Do you really think that farming here will yield anything? You'll only produce ghouls. All right then. I also knew that unless there was something wrong with their head, who would want to set up a farm here in such a haunted place with chilly winds? Although we had cooperated with the hell demons and bought this land of the dead where negative energy gathered, it was evident that they still hadn't given up on collecting additional information. But our target is on this piece of land. How's the big guy's condition? Heloise quietly sat on the ground, her eyes somewhat wooden. Meanwhile, her clone was collecting all sorts of information for her. Soon, her eyes were filled with energy again. Excellent. He's already entered a dormant period. He'll be able to move out in about half a month. I nodded in satisfaction. Since everything was going smoothly, we could come back in half a month to reap the fruits of our labor. It's just that those hell demons brats came to check several times. It seems that they still haven't given up and want to know why we bought this land. No wonder. After all, this is the Lord of Yonya's goal. It's only natural that ordinary undead mages would be quite tempting. Let them take a look. It's not like they'll be able to tell anything. After all, who would have thought that all we really want is this land filled with negative energy? We don't even need individual corpses. Our new creation is this graveyard. Graveyard Demon was the name that we gave it not too long ago. It was a half-undead, half-earth elemental creature formed from graveyard dirt that was filled with negative energy. It was a powerful source of negative energy pollution. Not only could it greatly increase the undead's combat strength, it was also the home of small to medium-sized undead. These undead beasts are not our original invention. There should be similar existences among the undead in ancient times, but there are no such giant undead beasts in modern times. It is an experimental product that we made with reference to ancient documents and current technological conditions. When I was in the Forest of Dreams, I was most envious of the Forest of Dreams buffs and Jill's ability to modify the environment. Since I couldn't choose the battlefield, I would think of a way to make the battlefield my home ground. Graveyard demons were useful here. They were mobile graveyards that the undead could replenish their negative energy, change their limbs, and strengthen their combat strength at any time. As long as an injured undead didn't die on the spot, they would be able to quickly recover their combat strength in this graveyard. The Wood Spirit's combat style gave me some inspiration. Perhaps the undead didn't need any powerful troop types anymore. What they lacked were healing and support types like Drool and Priests. The undead army was already skilled at attrition battles. If they could obtain the ability to replenish themselves on the battlefield, they would be far more effective at increasing their combat strength than any other powerful troop type. Of course, this wasn't the only reason why we left the city by ourselves. The crow in the sky had already landed on the black cat's head. Then, it transformed into a silver liquid and disappeared. Harloise, who had received the information from the female worm's aerial reconnaissance, nodded slightly at me. I was instantly overjoyed. So the big fish has finally taken a bait? Chapter 309. Archmage Sandro is ranked second out of the 4 vice leaders of the Sword of Order. On the surface, he's a master of wind magic, but he's actually the boss of the ghosts behind the scenes. He's a peak myth-ranked undead mage. Although he didn't receive the emblem of truth for undead magic, that's probably only because he didn't come up with any theories. After all, nobody in the Cloud Tower is more qualified than him to receive the emblem of truth. Also, he's also my junior, Heloise. You've really taught so many excellent disciples. No, I met him before you. No matter what, he's still your senior. The silly cat before me was still pretending to be natural. However, as a core member of the Sword of Order, she had personally experienced searching for outstanding new blood for the Sword of Order. From a certain standpoint, she was an elder of the Sword of Order who was even more experienced than Sandro. How's your relationship with the Sword of Order's leader who never shows his face? You already said that he never shows his face, so how could we have a relationship? Don't even talk about how secretive Black Eye is. Ever since my identity was exposed, it's likely that all my disciples are under surveillance. That old bastard is probably afraid that I'll steal his power. Otherwise, he wouldn't have forced me to leave back then. What does the identity of an undead mean to us? He's just finding an excuse to chase me away. It means that if nothing unexpected happens, you'll never be able to surpass the semi-god rank of Black Eye. Can't you say something nicer? Right? Hurry up and improve your personal power level. It's so uncomfortable that a magical pet can't surpass its master's contract. I also want to experience the semi-god rank of the undead. As long as I recover my power level, how could I, all-knowing Heloise, be any weaker than you brats? The silly cat seemed to become angry from embarrassment as she said this. Even if the requirement for non-undead creatures to grow up will be lowered, are you really that confident in breaking through the triple door? Of course. I had already reached the threshold, but I didn't even have a physical body. How could I possibly break through the barrier of body and soul fusion? I finally found a suitable physical body, a high elf body with the blood of an ancient god, but I didn't even get to use it for a single day before you and that atom dismembered me. The more I think about it, the angrier I get. I want to bite you. Damn it, you already bit me, so why are you still talking? Don't move. Let me take a few more bites to vent my anger. I felt rather helpless as I watched the silly cat bite me, from my chest all the way to my neck, and then to my face. I wanted to laugh, but I knew that if I laughed, Heloise would really become angry out of embarrassment. Since when did the immortal king of resentment really become a house cat that knew how to act like a spoiled child? Did it start from the day we signed the magical pet contract, when we inexplicably got used to each other's existence? Perhaps it was the day Rose died, and her journey of vengeance really came to an end. At least in her heart, there was something other than resentment, and she did not close her heart in her own world again. Perhaps it was the day they were destined to reach the end together. In a sense, the magic pet contract was indeed outrageous. It forcefully bound two different souls together. Perhaps it was from the day he decided to open his heart to her lonely self at all times. Soul communication was much more effective than any language. The lonelier one's heart was, the more they longed for communication. Perhaps it was from the day she unknowingly got used to the other's body temperature. Perhaps it was from the day she got used to saying good morning to the other every day. Perhaps it was from the day she started treating the other less and less like an outsider. All right then, let's not think too much about it. Judging from how her soft and numbing bites suddenly turned into painful bites, the silly cat had become Tsundere again. Hey, don't go too overboard. We still have to meet people later. What if my face is scratched? People will think that my grape trellis collapsed. I'll just tell you the truth. You can just say that your cat scratched my face. Is that any different from a grape trellis? That's just a common excuse you use when a woman scratches your face. You're intentionally trying to make me lose face. All right then, when the peak-level Archmage's carriage stopped in front of us, Sandro was stunned as he looked at me, who was still trying my best to pull off the silly cat that was biting my head and refusing to come down. Second senior brother, I'll talk to you in detail after I subdue Master. Tui, you can't defeat me, so you're asking for an outsider's help? Useless man. What happened next completely destroyed the image of the mysterious dark mage that I had worked so hard to build. Who would be able to respect a guy who rolled on the ground and fought with his pet cat for more than half an hour, only to lose when his face was full of claws and teeth marks? Image. We're archmages who symbolize knowledge and wisdom. Can't you have some sense of shame? Tui, sense of shame? Is that even edible? Ever since I started following you, I've done all kinds of cosplay. How could I possibly have any image left? You've always forced me to change into this and that. Do you really like pet cosplay so much? Now that you're someone important, you're going to put on your pants and refuse to acknowledge your mistakes? I'm telling you, don't even think about it. Don't intentionally make it sound so ambiguous. Look at second senior brother. He's so cold when he looks at me. It's like he's looking at Bayfoam. My reputation. Actually, there are quite a few demon warlocks who have affairs with their succubi. I'm not biased against them. Although Archmage Roland's interests are a little unique. A little, that's still personal freedom. Yep, I can understand. All right then, I repeatedly emphasized that I could understand. That slight retreat was actually a perfect last hit. But fortunately, Heloise always remembered that this was the time to get down to business. Roland, I say, forget about your reputation. It's already hopeless. Sandro, long time no see. It's been almost 200 years. By the way, can't you just change your name to something cooler? That's basically a textbook undead mage name. This soul fluctuation? Heloise. Teacher Heloise. All right then, the all-knowing one's appearance helped me redeem some of my reputation. With this demon professor acting as a bridge between me and my fellow apprentices, many things could be directly discussed. Do you want to become the leader of the Sword of Order? Do you want the Sword of Order to become a holy land for unrestrained heretic mages? This was the first sentence I said to Sandro. It was also the core of our conversation. We had spent quite a bit of time plotting against each other, but we had both obtained quite a bit. Andrew was even more hurried than when he had first arrived, and he seemed to be sincerely welcoming me. It would seem that both of us had obtained unexpected benefits. Is it possible to succeed? However, I wasn't as confident as I had been when I convinced Andrew. After all, nobody would be certain that they could win against an old mage who had been in charge of a top-level magic guild for 300 or 400 years. It's basically impossible with just him. He's far too stupid. Out of all my disciples, he's probably in the bottom 3 in terms of intelligence. I suddenly felt pity for this bald old mage. Just now, he had been having such a great time talking to me, acting as if he was a teacher and his disciple. Heloise had even repeatedly said, "the future leader of the Sword of Order," and "my most trusted disciple," several times, making him quite happy. How can someone so stupid become the vice leader of the Sword of Order? That's because all those who aren't stupid have been killed by Black Eye. Otherwise, the Sword of Order wouldn't have been suppressed by the other top-level magic guilds, even though there are so many heretical mages in the Sword of Order. Then why did you say that you trust him the most? Of course he's my most trusted disciple. That's because all my other disciples are far too sly and untrustworthy, especially a certain someone. It's already good enough if he doesn't betray me. The silly cat even glanced at me as she said this. It was obvious that she was implying something, but I simply looked up at the sky and pretended not to understand. In that case, we can't count on him anymore. Only by convincing him to become a traitor and attract Black Eye's attention will we have a chance at success. So, you have other plans as well? Yeah. More than 70% of the Sword of Order's members are heretical mages. They're quite different from other mage guilds. Their resources and research funds are distributed in a jungle style. Many mages are also passionate about power and authority. They're a force that can be used. I really wanted to take control of this organization back in the day. That's why you were chased away by Black Eye. But nobody knows just how many disciples or confidants I had back in the day. Nobody knows just how many of them reached the peak like Sandro. Actually, there was also a vice leader who worked for me. She was far smarter than Sandro. From a certain standpoint, Demon Professor Heloise wasn't even on the calamity rankings because of her own personal danger. Apart from her revenge against the elven gods, she was basically harmless. The most dangerous part about her was that she often taught forbidden and dark knowledge to geniuses who strayed from the right path. Perhaps it wouldn't be noticeable in a short period of time, but it was just like how an old farmer would casually scatter seeds into the fertile soil. Perhaps the seeds would spend most of their time sleeping there, but there would always be a few dangerous seeds that would accidentally sprout. That would be a huge problem. Back in the day, Amelia was like this. I was also like this. Sometimes I would ask myself if my life would have taken a completely different direction if I hadn't met Sandro in this city, if I hadn't come into contact with that forbidden knowledge, if I hadn't met Yonya. No, I know my own personality better than anyone else. Personality determines fate. The me back in the day was unable to let go. Even if I hadn't met Heloise, perhaps the process would have been different, but the result would probably be the same. I wasn't an idiot who would blame others for my own mistakes. I shook my head and cast aside all these unnecessary emotions. Right now, the most important thing was the present. In order to influence the final conclusion of the true symposium, I would indeed need the full support of several major organizations. So, does that mean that it's highly likely that we'll be able to obtain control over the Sword of Order? No. Black Eye has already controlled this organization for several hundred years. I feel that no matter how I plan, the success rate won't be more than 30%. But as long as we prove that we have the confidence to split the Sword of Order apart, Black Eye will definitely come to a compromise with us. We don't ask for much anyway, so he should be able to accept it. The silly cat jumped onto my shoulder and smiled proudly. She seemed to have seen through my goal. Indeed. We won't lose anything regardless of whether we succeed or not. The worst result is that he only needs to support me in this truth symposium. Actually, I thought that you would oppose my plan. Heloise was actually hesitating. Why would you think that? Your suggestion helped increase the success rate of my plan. In fact, I'm quite grateful to you. After all, back in Sulphur Mountain City, you created that set of laws and legal procedures that repeatedly emphasize the process of judgment and procedural justice. I thought that you cared more about the correct process than the correct result. Overthrowing another mage organization and causing internal strife in an otherwise harmonious mage organization isn't correct at all. No, it's actually the opposite. Of course I care about the process. That's because the rules are to be placed under the sun to give people confidence and a sense of safety. But sometimes I need to make a choice. If it's impossible for both sides to take care of each other, then it's enough as long as the result is good. As for myself, I'm just an evil person. I wasn't lying at all. It was impossible for me to lie due to our soul connection. Back when I was in Sulphur Mountain City, my personal prison was filled with evil bastards who couldn't be judged but had committed terrible crimes. Even if I couldn't satisfy the requirements of procedural justice, I could accept it as long as the result was just. But I also knew that I was actually no different from those evil bastards who did whatever they wanted. I was still an evil person who pursued self-satisfaction. It seemed that the silly cat was quite satisfied with my answer. For the sake of our own goals, we caused others to bleed and even die. As long as our own goals were achieved, we didn't care about anyone else's death. We truly are evil partners. Of course, there's no difference between us. No matter what the reason was, some things have already been done. In the end, I'm just an evil person. I've never denied this. Then, my fellow evil person, when will you give me my freedom and release me from prison? I'm truly sorry. Through this incident, I've once again confirmed that you're far too dangerous. For the sake of the world, your punishment will still be life imprisonment with no possibility of bail. That's really too much. Well, since there's no other way, I'll have to ask for your guidance in the future. Comrade Prison Guard. I suddenly understand Adam and the others' helplessness a little. Actually, I think it's more appropriate to call us prison mates. At the very least, I've also locked myself in prison. Is there a difference? I think there's still a slight difference. At the very least, prison mates have similar food and treatment, and prison guards can find opportunities to take care of prisoners they don't like. They can even deduct the prisoner's treatment to play with them. They can even give the prisoner a day off. I suddenly feel like being a prison guard is better. Can I change that? Don't even think about it. I'm destined to be an evil person forever. Since you're a man, it's a promise. A human and a cat chatted and laughed together in a haunted and desolate mountain. They talked about schemes that were destined to cause a calamity. It was as if they were talking about something interesting in a ghost story. But only they knew that this was probably the happiest time they had ever had. Chapter 3:10. High up in the mountains, golden battle flags of light fluttered in the wind. Below the flags was an orderly military formation. At the very front were noble knights. Their adamantine armor reflected a dazzling golden light under the sunlight. Their steeds, shields, and swords were all equipped with their weapons with the help of their attendants. They were now ready to charge. But judging from their uneven armor, it was obvious that they weren't from the same country. Yet they were fighting under the same flag. At this moment, the horn for charge hadn't been blown yet. The knights tightened their reins to prevent their impulsive horses from messing up their formation. Behind the knights were heavily armored dragon gunners. Guards with tower shields were patrolling the area. Archers and catapults were anxiously calculating the trajectory of the arrows. At the very back of the army, priests were singing holy songs. The air was filled with the fragrance of holy water. There were even several important figures wearing red cardinal robes among them. Although the cardinals were obviously the highest-ranking members of the army, the Holy Light's battle flag wasn't only composed of holy light warriors. There were also the crescent flag, the golden snake emblem, the three-headed dog emblem, and countless other famous and unknown emblems of flags. The Holy Church had summoned countless devout believers, local domain lords, and even ordinary farmers who were fighting for the Holy Light would raise their wooden spears and participate in this battle. Facing off against them were no easy opponents. This was the Holy Light's border defense army. Perhaps they weren't as well-equipped or well-prepared as the Holy Lights, and they didn't even have 1/10 of the Holy Light's numbers, but they absolutely had a reason to not retreat. This was their home. They were the Holy Light's East Erkenfeld's 1st Military Squadron, which was responsible for defending this place. They were also the soldiers of Erkenfeld City, which was located several hundred kilometers away. A holy war? No, it's just another ordinary battle where everyone hates each other and wants to kill each other. They were already surrounded by the Holy Light's ambush. It would be impossible for them to outrun these knights on flat plains. Even though they were facing an army 10 times their size, perhaps their feet were instinctively trembling, but their hearts were as resolute as a boulder. Perhaps their arms holding shields weren't steady enough, and some rookies even dropped their weapons, but not a single one of them retreated. Everyone, prepare for the charge. The order to do battle had been passed down for quite some time now. Every Bardi Empire's border guard was waiting for their own deaths as they faced an undefeatable army. Finally, the silver-haired general of the invaders completed his final preparations. The Holy Knight Marshal, who wore golden lion-patterned armor, rode back and forth in front of the enemy formation, his eagle-like gaze searching for any weaknesses in the enemy formation. However, he still didn't see any signs of the enemy collapsing or wavering. Finally, he gave up on the extravagant hope of winning without a fight. He also made the mental preparation to pay an equivalent amount of sacrifice. His eyes were still sharp, but his wrinkled face changed in an instant. He first nodded in agreement with his opponent, but then he shook his head as if it was a pity that the warriors of both sides were about to die. He made up his mind to end the battle quickly, so he unsheathed the military sword that represented Zhang Qi. It was stimulated by the holy light and flashed with golden splendor under the sunlight. Wah! When the commander's sword, which was embedded with a blue teardrop stone, landed, an ancient beast horn sounded, and the holy priests finished their final mass. The participating warriors' golden swords were filled with water droplets condensed from holy water. They had all sorts of different equipment to begin with, and the various buff divine arts on them made them seem rather laughable. However, in the eyes of their enemies, these buff divine arts were powerful tools that would greatly increase their combat strength. The mixed battle formation had always been rather noisy, but now that they truly began to move, the sound of horse hooves, footsteps, and battle roars all mixed together, finally creating an earth-shaking rumble. The gigantic army slowly slid down like a landslide, pressing down on the enemy formation at the foot of the mountain. For the Holy Light, all the shouting combined into a single phrase. The name of Holy Light once again rang out in this holy war. But this time, both sides were still humans of the same species. Bardi, long live victory! Bardi's royal spear and divine scepter clashed in midair. When the landslide and the boulder collided, time seemed to freeze at this moment. Tower shields with cross tattoos viciously smashed into battle hammers with dragon heads. Golden spears nailed the crossbowmen who had been stirring their bowstrings to the ground. Catapults thundered in unison as they used their own methods to whip the ground. Bardi's warriors weren't foolhardy enough to send themselves to their deaths. They had done their homework for the Knight Vanguard, which was the most difficult to deal with. The Knight's charge was stopped by pits and horse tripping ropes. The 10-meter-long Super Dragon Spear formation harvested the lives of the venerable Knights. However, there was far too much of a difference in numbers between the two sides. It was just like how a small flame would be unable to dry up a river. Once these obstacles were filled up by corpses, the difference in quality and quantity made the Bardi First Army a target to be harvested. Screams and howls of pain could be heard everywhere. Not even 5 minutes had passed since the battle began, and the balance of the battle had already been lost. It was now a massacre of the many against the few. The flesh grinders were harvesting lives. No one dared to close their eyes and scream. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, as if the gods were unwilling to witness such a tragedy. Honor? Glory? Courage? Blessing of the holy light? Such things didn't exist on a battlefield like this. All the warriors needed to do was stab their swords into their enemy's chest before they died. Pity? Justice? Friendship? Under the dark clouds and on the stage, the sword dancers only had two choices: kill their enemy or be killed by their enemy. The tremendous difference in numbers allowed the bloody battle to end very quickly. However, the ambush battle without any captives turned the battlefield into a sea of blood and corpses. And the legendary veteran General Gordon, who was known as Biso's Eagle, didn't seem like a victor at all. The entire Bardi army was annihilated, yet they still fought to the death. They forcefully caused more than double the number of casualties. Is this the mega Empire Bardi, actively invading such a country? This type of battle won't be easy to fight. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to indicate that this battle wasn't going to end well. Even the veteran General Gordon, who was ranked 7th on the Holy Light rankings and was nominally the highest commander of the Allied Holy Light armies, no longer had any confidence in victory against the human mega Empire Bardi. However, there was no turning back. Gordon's commanding sword was already pointed at the next target. Akenfeld City. That city is now empty. It'll be our first victory. The Bardi Empire is voluntarily negotiating for peace. How is that possible? If I was facing Marguerite, who had an icy expression on her face, I probably wouldn't have exclaimed in surprise. Instead, I would have directly called her nonsense. I was currently in a coffee shop attached to Thorngarden. Apart from me, Heloise, and Marguerite, there was only Adam, who was currently playing poker with himself. It was evident that he was incredibly bored. As for why Marguerite seemed to be in a bad mood, it seemed that I was the one who caused it. Of course, I could understand why Marguerite was in a bad mood. After all, they still didn't have much free time to spend alone time together after completing their mission. Every time they went out by themselves, I would always drag them back to the Cloud Tower. This time, in order to better control the situation at the Cloud Tower, I had to summon them back. I really wasn't doing this on purpose. After all, there were some things that only she would be able to deal with. Setting aside Adam, who was an extra, for now, even though Marguerite was a rogue mage, she was a heroic mage during the battle against Yongya. The calm and elegant Marguerite had quite a high reputation in the Cloud Tower. At the very least, her mage organization was one of the highest level members of the Cloud Tower. Back when I was in a mage country, I was nothing more than a small shrimp. Apart from my friends from a mystical blade, I didn't have much contact with the higher-ups of the mage country. However, Marguerite was a candidate for the position of Truth Overseer, and she had lived here for more than 30 years. She could definitely be considered a local here. Outsiders would forever be outsiders. That barrier between us would require time and opportunity to slowly grind away. Right now, what we lacked the most was time. However, if we had the help of a local archmage, many things would become much more convenient. I had long since learned from Adam that if she wanted to, she would have had the chance to pass the internal selection of the Star Revelation and become a member of the Truth Overseers when she returned to the Mage Country. She had already rejected the Star Revelation, Hess' request to go traveling, but I had dragged her back here. It would be quite awkward for her to face a familiar face, so of course she would be displeased. Right now, not only did Marguerite shamelessly return to the Star Revelation and help me find out some information, but I didn't believe her, which naturally made her even more displeased. Is there anything else? If not, I'm going to go back and write a report. It was that report on whether the Lord of Yongya has been active in the Northlands that was half a year late. You really are a super troublemaker. She was tapping her exquisite fingers on the table. It was obvious that she wasn't in a good mood. From a certain standpoint, this really was my fault. Back then, Marguerite and Amelia had used the excuse of investigating the undead and Lord of Yongya in the Northlands as an excuse to set out under the name of the Cloud Tower. Yet, even after so many days had passed, Not a single person had returned with an investigation report. A government-funded trip? From a certain standpoint, that was indeed correct. In that case, didn't Amelia, who was currently in hibernation, become a vegetable because of an accident while she was out on a business trip? How could she still receive government-funded medical treatment? Cough, cough, let's be serious. Yep, it was obvious that I couldn't count on Amelia to hand in a report right now. As the last mage in the Cloud Tower with the emblematic truths level information, Marguerite had to complete this report. Even if this report was destined to be meaningless, it would still be necessary for her to complete her previous work. She would even need to explain why Amelia hadn't returned with her. And so, the unfortunate great sage Marguerite was just like a naughty child who had too much fun and forgot about her summer homework. She was urged by her teacher and driven by endless regret to do meaningless homework that no one would take seriously. It was said that Marguerite hated doing meaningless homework the most. I'm really busy. That report needs to be submitted by the day after tomorrow. No wonder she had such a deep grudge against me. No wonder Adam pretended that he didn't know anything and did his best to hide in a corner so that he wouldn't have to worry about Marguerite taking out her anger on him for talking nonsense. I apologize. It's not that I don't trust you. It's that this matter is far too bizarre. How did the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country come to an agreement? That's impossible, isn't it? Still, I couldn't be blamed for doubting her. That was because what Marguerite had said was far too inconceivable. Mega empires like the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country would be like two high-speed trains once they entered state of war. Their weight and momentum would be tremendous. How could they possibly stop just like that? The damage from the previous Forbidden Spells bombardment was still fresh in everyone's minds. The confrontation between the Dragon Knight and the Archmage on the Eastern Front was the latest news. Although I hadn't heard of any major losses on either side, and it seemed that both sides were still restraining themselves, it was impossible for both sides to simply greet each other and then go their separate ways. The Dragon Knight fought for its honor, while the Archmage had the confidence to be arrogant. Since both sides had met, it was likely that neither side would believe that they hadn't fought each other to test each other's strength. But if they fought, it would be impossible for either side to back down. And even if the Mage Country wanted to negotiate for peace, the Bardi Empire would never agree. One of their own fortresses had been destroyed, along with so many people. The Dragon Knight would need to get revenge, and the Bardi Empire would need to take revenge. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the Bardi Empire to explain itself to its citizens. Even if the Bardi Empire's upper echelons were able to restrain themselves from the threat of the undead, they would definitely provoke the Bardi Empire. In such a situation, the Bardi Empire and the Bardi Empire actually wanted to negotiate for peace. This was completely incomprehensible. However, Marguerite remained silent in response to my suspicions. However, Adam couldn't bear to watch this any longer. Cough. That's because you're not allowed to say it. The two of us exchanged glances in response to the furious Harloise, and then tacitly agreed to remain silent. At the very least, someone has to help me write that meaningless report. Marguerite seemed to be talking to herself, but I pretty much knew what I should say. Let me write the report. I'm the best at writing reports. All right then, let's not talk about how incomprehensible it was for Emperor Yongye to personally write a report on whether the Lord of Yongye's activities existed in the Northlands. Let's not talk about how much I had to rack my brain over this damned report tonight. But at the very least, for now, the great philosopher finally nodded in satisfaction as she told me the secret information that very few people in the Cloud Tower knew about. The Holy War has begun. Although Marguerite's words were simple, Adam added something to them. The Holy Church's allied armies have crossed the Eladon Mountains and ambushed the Bardi Empire's southern border, Erkenfeld City. The war has erupted. I opened my mouth wide. I never expected that the Holy Church would actually get involved at such a time. According to my expectations, it would be impossible for the Holy Church to start a war in such a short period of time. Erkenfeld City? I checked the map. The Holy Church's territory wasn't even connected to Erkenfeld City. The Eladon Mountains? Isn't that the Ponglin Alliance's territory? Don't they worship the Earth Mother Goddess? Why would they allow the Holy Church's allied armies to pass through? One day before the Holy War, the highest priest of the Polin Alliance's Earth Mother Goddess Church converted to the god of Holy Light. The entire country converted to Holy Light, and then the allied armies entered Erkenfeld. They even brought with them the top 10 mercenary groups of the Polin Alliance and the Holy Church's Holy Temple Knight Squadron. All right then, it seemed that there was quite a bit of trickery involved. Perhaps the Polin Alliance had long since joined the Holy Light faction. But no matter how unexpected the process was, the Holy Church's ambush was quite successful. How's the battle situation? Erkenfeld City's defending army was completely annihilated, and the city was lost. There's also the Holy War. You know what it means. As someone who was unlucky enough to be attacked by the Holy War, of course I knew. The Holy War was against heretics, and heretics' women and children were all evil. They were all targets that needed to be purified. The Holy War's wealth and land would be used to reward the holy believers who fought for their faith. There would only be one result for any city that was destroyed in the Holy War. They massacred the entire city. Although it was a question, she sounded very certain. Yep. The small room fell silent for a moment. Judging from the magical energy pulsating between Marguerite's eyebrows, she wasn't in a bad mood just because of that damned report. It was quite obvious why the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country were willing to negotiate for peace. Once the Holy War started, it would be impossible to stop. Not to mention, the Bardi Empire had an undead army that was growing like a malignant tumor. The Bardi Empire was basically facing enemies on 3 sides. Faced with such a desperate situation, even the most insane ruler would think of a method to temporarily negotiate with one side to reduce the pressure. Don't look so grim. At least there's good news. At the very least, the Mage Country is willing to negotiate with the Bardi Empire. Our plan will become much easier. That's the second bad news. According to the latest intelligence reports, there's a 90% chance that the Bardi Empire will refuse to negotiate for peace. Not only will the war between the Mage Country and the Bardi Empire not stop, it's even likely to escalate. It seems that the mages hope to use this opportunity to deal with their restless neighbor once and for all. Chapter 3:11. AD 392, the 16th year since the start of the New Holy War. Ever since the Holy War began, Emperor Orlos XIII of the Bardi Empire didn't show the decisiveness and initiative that he had since ascending to the throne. Instead, he constantly made extremely passive defensive decisions. Although he strengthened his military and prepared for war, he watched as the neighboring countries' wars fell into a stalemate. But in that year, the flames of war that no one could avoid still burned their heads. It was the undead who sought them out. On the 3rd month that the pitch-black night mysteriously enveloped the Bardi Empire's capital, the undead arrived. In a single night, countless dimensional doors opened up in various countries. The largest dimensional door opened up in the Bardi Empire's capital. On the same day, undead Emperor Aso of the Desecration Plane descended and cast a forbidden spell, Undead Calamity, in the capital. 90% of the population was transformed into undead, and the Bardi Empire was destroyed. This was actually a description of the Bardi Empire's background in the game's history. Orlos XIII, who originally had a good reputation, became a synonym for an embroidered pillow. This further proved that being indifferent to the Holy War was basically the same as waiting for death. However, the real world was obviously different from the virtual game world. At the very least, due to the existence of the 4 elemental gods and the absence of players, the elemental tide rose much faster than expected. The Holy War had begun several years earlier than expected. Even if the undead emperors would only descend 10 years later, the undead would arrive much earlier than in the game's history. The game's history has probably advanced the Holy War by around 9 to 15 years. Let's hope that Onderoken's death will be slightly delayed. Otherwise, it'll be difficult for the new generation's heroes to mature. Of course, I wasn't too worried. To use an old saying, the flow of history was unstoppable. A few individuals and coincidences wouldn't be able to change the overall trend. Wars that were destined to erupt would most likely be unavoidable. And many things were far too complicated. There were far too many factors that would affect the outcome. It would be difficult to analyze the effects of success or failure. The war was brought forward, and the preparation period was shortened. This also meant that the human country's internal conflicts could be avoided to the greatest extent. It was impossible to calculate the gains and losses. The heroes in the game's history were still lacking in maturity. This would indeed have an impact. Nobody could count on the snot-nosed brat to come up with strategies. A newbie who hadn't been tempered would barely be a passable soldier, and they wouldn't be able to lead their own troops without any reputation. Nobody could guarantee that the heroes wouldn't be able to obtain enough nutrients to become the ruthless characters in the game's history. However, true heroes were still created by the times. Even if Hero A died, there would still be the current situation. Even if Hero A died, there would be even stronger Archmages B and C to Thief C. On the other hand, the fact that there were no internal conflicts meant that the current famous generals didn't die in battle. The early battles also allowed the veterans of the previous generation to continue leading. Just the current elemental Biso's eagle was already quite difficult to deal with. In the game's history, Biso would choke to death 7 years later because he ate 2 half-cooked eggs in one go. Apart from those who committed suicide, it was impossible to choose how they died. Actually, the reason why some great heroes died was the greatest joke of their lives. When I saw this scene, I was quite proud of myself and secretly felt lucky. At the very least, the few times I died were quite perfect. I was happy that I died so perfectly, but it seemed that there was something wrong with me. Forget it. Let's not look into it. Cough. Getting back to the main topic, based on my understanding of history, estimating the butterfly effect caused by certain events was as unreliable as prophecy. The more you thought about it, the more mistakes you would make. The most obvious example was the Bardi Empire's history that I just mentioned. Should I say that the situation had worsened? At the very least, in the game's history, the Bardi Empire was still peaceful and prosperous during this period of time. It definitely wasn't like the current Bardi Empire was surrounded by enemies on 3 sides and could reach its end at any moment. But on the other hand, the undead scheme had already been thrown out into the open. Their scheme to destroy the Bardi Empire in one fell swoop had already failed. At the very least, it was impossible for the Bardi Empire to be destroyed in the future. In that case, should I say that the situation had improved? It's probably impossible for anyone to come to a conclusion. After all, even the god of fate wouldn't be able to clearly grasp fate. If you look too far ahead, you'll end up falling into the pit you're stepping on. Grasping the present is enough. That's right. All I could really do was grasp the present and sow the seeds of the future. Many a little makes a mickle, and I would do my best to guide the overall situation in a positive direction. That was why the light of law and the study of magical engineering were spread. That was also why the current system of justice points and the net of starlight were created. I believed that these seeds would eventually grow into towering trees that would influence the world for the better. Of course, this didn't mean that the game's history wasn't important. To be honest, I had always viewed the game's history as the greatest cheat of all. With the information and records provided by the game's history, I would be able to directly understand people and events. In fact, I would even be able to see many omens that normal people wouldn't be able to see and make predictions beforehand. However, this advantage would also become increasingly useless as the game's history changed. From a certain standpoint, this was quite contradictory. After all, the more changes there were, the more evidence that my hard work had been effective. Nobody would be able to understand or trust the Bardi Empire's history, even if I told the public about it. And from a certain standpoint, at the very least, the princes of the Bardi Empire who were already vying for the throne would be the least willing to see the information contained in the game's history. After all, in their minds, their father, who was so old that he could die at any moment, was actually still able to easily live for more than 20 years. No matter how much trouble they caused, they would likely be nothing more than naughty monkeys in the hands of the Buddha. Just a short piece of information about an emperor who was still alive for more than 20 years was enough to change the political decisions of an entire country. This was the magical power of the little book. If the news that Emperor Bardi still had more than 20 years left to live was spread, the entire situation in the country would change. The first prince's faction and the eighth prince's faction would all disappear. However, the domain lords who couldn't wait to be reshuffled would probably directly rebel. The end result would be that there would be too many factors involved. There would be too many positive and negative effects, and the final outcome would still be unclear. When all the numbers were just variables, how could one possibly make a complete judgment based on a single point of information? If someone really did make such a judgment, it would only be because that person already knew the answer, based on my common sense. Only by gathering enough information and using the logical reasoning of many advisors would one be able to make a definite judgment about the future. Not only that, the accuracy would plummet as the information was lacking. That was why I never understood how the intelligent protagonists in stories were able to figure out a super scheme from a single detail. How could they make all the arrangements so precisely and without fail? How could they make all the individuals with different personalities dance in the palm of their hands? After all, even the same person could make different decisions based on their mood every single day. A large man who appeared bold on the outside might be quite meticulous on the inside. Guessing another person's current reaction would be the same as guessing what that person wanted to eat for dinner tonight. If someone could even guess everything like that, that would probably be an even more unreasonable cheat and main character aura than my history. Cough. I seem to have inadvertently made fun of something again. Let's get back to the main topic. Yep, let's get straight to the conclusion. Something was abnormal, incredibly abnormal. No matter if it was Arlo or Bardi, no matter if it was history or the present, everything felt incredibly strange. This strange part had been there from the very start. Why did the Bardi Empire insist on making trouble for the harmless mage country of Arlo? If it was just to expand their territory and influence, there were plenty of other options available to them. Why did the Bardi Empire insist on going after the hardest rock? The situation in Arlo was even stranger. Why did the eternally neutral Arlo Empire use forbidden spells as a last resort to counterattack against the Bardi Empire? Since when did the mages become even more impatient than berserkers? Why did the usually moderate neutral Bardi Empire suddenly become even more extreme than the radical Bardi Empire? And why didn't the other Archmages of the Truth Symposium retaliate against their overly extreme actions? Why did the Bardi Empire refuse to negotiate for peace at such a time? Even if the mages destroyed the Bardi Empire, what benefits could they possibly obtain? Did they intend to change to farming instead? Meanwhile, although history had already happened, there were still many suspicious points. For example, the Bardi Empire was completely sealed off from the Bardi Empire, which was completely different from the current situation. Also, why were there no records of what happened to the Dragon Knight? Oh my, it feels like both sides are still treating me as an outsider. Considering all the information I had, no matter how I thought about it, it was like I was missing a large piece of a puzzle. I kept feeling like something was missing. Since it was highly unlikely that the mages would all go crazy together, there was naturally something I didn't know about, which was why the situation had developed so far beyond my expectations. It would seem that even Marguerite won't be able to obtain that information so easily. Thorn Garden and the recent research results that I had released were the best advertisement for me. Recently, I had indeed done my best to blend into the Cloud Tower and make the Archmages here acknowledge my existence. My system's continuously increasing reputation was also a statistical reflection that my recent efforts had indeed been effective. However, life wasn't a game. Even if my reputation reached the level of worship, that didn't mean that I would truly worship you. Trust was something that required time. I still had my reputation weighing me down, and I needed concrete actions to prove that I was trustworthy. All of this would require time to prove. And right now, I didn't have the time. That was why, even though I knew that Marguerite would be quite displeased, I still called her over to help me. After all, she was also a member of the Cloud Tower. Of course, it would be best if Amelia was here. I trusted in the Haletum goddess's abilities. Since she still hadn't received any information about the Cloud Tower, it was likely that only a few archmages knew the truth. However, some people definitely knew, such as the person who had cast the forbidden spell. Since all the mage organizations had no objections to this, the leaders of the 18 top-level mage organizations would definitely know. And we would soon have to deal with one of them. The Sword of Order's leader, Black Eye? That's such a nostalgic name. The Cloud Tower's famous Tower of 10,000 Spells wasn't actually a mage tower, but rather an auditorium. It didn't seem large, but its interior had been enhanced with spatial magic. Its actual surface area was large enough to accommodate 10,000 people. In the Cloud Tower, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold, such technology was quite common. However, no matter how you compared this building to any other building, this building was the best of the best. The floor tiles were as white as jade, and they were made of magical mithril that had been refined many times over. The walls were made of star sand that seemed like ancient mysteries. Every seat was made of natural jade, although there weren't any particularly extravagant decorations. Just the materials used to construct this large conference room were far more expensive than any other human country. Normally, whenever a truth symposium was held, archmages wearing extravagant mage robes would enter one by one. Magical books would float in front of every seat, and various documents would be projected onto a large screen in the middle of the room. The spectator stands would be filled with mages listening to the discussion. Every single resolution would be passed, and this place would become the center of Arlo due to the clamor of people. But today, the most central conference room was activated once again. Although the large round table in the middle wasn't full as usual, there were only a few seats missing. Even the spectator stands, which were usually filled, were completely empty. This was actually a private conference. 22 out of 28 soul counselors are here. 15 out of 18 organizations are here. This is probably the first time in the past 5 years that everyone is here. Since everyone knows how important this conference is, let's get straight to the topic. The Seven-Color Tower was a paradise for elemental magic researchers. Archmage Antonio was also the strongest flame envoy and forbidden spell mage. However, his appearance and rotund body resembled a certain fast food restaurant's mascot, which made him seem rather friendly and slow. However, those who were truly familiar with him would know that he hadn't chosen the wrong profession. When he was younger, his explosive temper was even more intolerable than the inferno demons in the lower planes. Now that he was older, although he was much calmer, and the white-bearded old man also seemed like a mascot, even taking on the role of hosting this conference. Everyone knew that this was just a facade. I'll just say it. This time, our problem is still the same thing, dragons. Chapter 312. While the Truth Symposium's archmages were still working hard in the conference room, the outside of the conference room was as lively as a market. Groups of gnomes and dwarves were loudly shouting and holding banners in the marble plaza. Flyers and banners were being distributed everywhere. Passers-by would also take 1 or 2 flyers for fun. Protesting is not wrong. Striking is right. I strongly request that the archmages improve the treatment of all non-human workers in the Cloud Tower. It's not like we don't have second-class workers. Black Eye's alchemy laboratory closed down. That bastard boss lost 300,000 gold coins from gambling and eating. He took his mistress, third mistress, and fourth mistress and ran away. Black Eye, you're not human. Scum, give me back my hard-earned money. You won't have a good ending. You'll definitely receive retribution. That's why, in order to raise our wages, we peasant workers are taking out that bastard's inventory and selling it at the lowest possible price. Don't let go of anyone who passes by. All right, it would be rather unrealistic to imagine these gnomes and dwarves waving banners and asking for a raise in wages. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the sight of the gnomes doing business among the protesters. However, there were some slogans with special meanings hidden among the protesters that seemed to be telling the truth. We don't want war. We want peace. The gnomes, who always carried various dangerous items with them, were no different from arms dealers in the eyes of most people. Indeed, It was quite amusing for them to raise such slogans. Why hasn't the war stopped yet? Our warriors are still bleeding. Our women are becoming widows, and our children are becoming orphans. Although these slogans and banners were quite provocative, those who knew the truth found them laughable. That was because there were no Mage Country soldiers at all on the front lines. Most of the Mage Country's soldiers were nobles' private soldiers in name only. They were probably only capable of maintaining law and order within the country. Right now, only archmages were fighting against the Dragon Knight on the front lines. What are they doing? They're probably performing some kind of art. The dwarves who were raising banners and slogans in front of the Hall of 10,000 Spells were quite incomprehensible. To be honest, it was likely that even these dwarves didn't know why they were here. Hey, old wine barrel. Those guys are looking at us as if we're idiots. How much longer do you think we'll continue embarrassing ourselves here? Don't complain, Kevin. Where else can you find such a good deal for 10 gold coins a day just to shout slogans and stand on the street? It wasn't that the dwarf Kevin wasn't satisfied with the extra reward from his boss. He just felt that it was a little silly to paint a clean and handsome dwarf green and then hold up a green flag. It was like Aunt Adele's burnt and sticky celery cake back home. When he stood there, everything seemed to stick together and was very unappetizing. Didn't you see that the gnomes didn't complain? They painted red to represent fresh blood. TSK, 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 the combination of red and green, coupled with the gnomes' disgusting prickly heads. It's simply, that's right, it's like a fly nailed to a piece of fat. Putting aside the gnomes' usual nitpicking, the gnomes were far more enthusiastic in their cheers than the gnomes, who didn't lack money at all. They were even patrolling left and right, hoping that their employer would see them working hard and give them more work. If they could make their employer happy, it would be even better if they could increase their wages. Is there any point in doing this? The archmages ignored him. Their conference has already been going on for 2 days. Nobody dares to go in and disturb them. Then you don't understand. Our employer never does meaningless things. Since he's spending money on us, he naturally has his own plans. The old dwarf paused at this point, until little Kevin tactfully and painfully took out his private tobacco pouch, filled it up, and lit it up. Then he took a deep puff fiercely. Our employer's main goal isn't to have them do as they say. He only wants to express his opinion. I know that you intend to start a war, and I'm against it, or I know that you're hiding something, and I'm not happy about it. Why don't we just rush into the conference? Directly express our demands. Those arcane guardians probably won't be able to stop our boss. That's no different from breaking off all relations with them and offending the entire truth symposium in the Mage Country. Can't youngsters use their brains a little more? That's why our employer's orders are to just stay here and shout our slogans. If anyone tries to chase us away, we'll leave. And since nobody's chasing us away, even after so long, their answer is, do whatever you want. We don't care. We absolutely can't let this information leak. In the conference room, a certain archmage spoke up. Asterisk clap. Asterisk, however. The next instant, the door to the conference room opened, and a blue-robed mage walked in. Behind him were the arcane guardians that had been torn apart into scrap metal. Roland, do you know what you've done? That's right, that was me. I was an unlucky individual who had been ostracized by the Truth Symposium, a foreman who had to take his subordinates and ask for their wages. Fine then. It seemed that I had accidentally made a mistake again. But at this moment, Osloan, the truth overseer of the mystical blade, shouted angrily. However, I knew that he was speaking on behalf of the Truth Symposium. In a way, he was trying to protect me. Otherwise, I would likely have to face the fact that I had accidentally offended the entire Truth Symposium, and the leader of an enemy organization would take this opportunity to attack me. I glanced at the faces on the conference table. This was truly nostalgic. Many of them were people I wanted to kill, or people who wanted to kill me. At the very least, there was Black Eye, who was annoyed by the advertising words I had personally written, and he was glaring at me viciously. I know that you all want to hide it, but what do you intend to do if I already know? Do you intend to silence me? Haha, let's talk about those dragons and giants together. Opportunities will always come quietly, but they will only favor those who are prepared. Half an hour ago, An unexpected coincidence gave me the key to open that door. Hallant came looking for me? He's already waiting for me in the guest hall? I wasn't surprised at all when I heard this news. After all, I had already received news of the peace negotiations. If Hallant was really an envoy from the Bardi Empire, then everything could be explained. When I returned to Thorn Garden and walked into the hallway, I didn't see the cold, handsome Beifeng who didn't speak much. Instead, I saw Beifeng, who was supposed to accompany me, sneaking out for some fresh air. Beifeng also heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that I had returned. You're still uncomfortable? I'm a superior dragon. After all, although I know it's nothing, I still instinctively feel uncomfortable. I nodded thoughtfully. Although draconians were called draconians, they were actually created from a small amount of dragons' blood and an intelligent species' secret magic. In the hierarchy of dragons, draconians were probably even lower than the semi-dragons, who had low intelligence. They were born to be servants and slaves. And it just so happened that the underground world's draconians were all slaves of the color dragons. In fact, they were even created by the dragons. Hallant was a descendant of the color dragons, a blue dragon. Furthermore, he had the potential to transform into a dragon in the future. There is such a huge difference in the hierarchy of dragons, so of course Beifeng would feel uncomfortable. Why did they ask you to be their host? Isn't this the same as asking Pleasant Goat to receive the big bad wolf? Or a sheep to receive the evil wolf? They probably felt that I, as a saint, would be the most suitable host. I didn't expect that even though my power level increased, the suppression from my bloodline became even more severe. However, that brat gave me a rather unique feeling. It was as if I was facing Lady Mises. Little Red? A dragon queen level bloodline. No wonder he was able to become the vice leader of the Dragon Knight Squadron at such a young age. Beifeng shook his head and focused his attention on the Dragon Knight Duke, who was still resting in the living room. His white face seemed to have been through a lot, and his head and armor were covered in sand. There were even some silver strands on his forehead at such a young age. It would seem that he hadn't been living well ever since we parted ways in the Forest of Dreams. I have some news. I'm currently going to meet the Truth Symposium, but they're apparently in a secret meeting. Could you introduce me to them? Hallant immediately stood up and spoke hurriedly the moment they met. His tone seemed to be rather anxious. Don't be in such a hurry. Let's talk slowly. But right now, Hallant's eyes were completely blank, as if he had just received some sort of shock. He lost all patience and immediately activated a memory crystal. This is also something that a lord wanted me to tell you. The circulation of mana on the table transformed into ripples of mana that formed a hazy scene in midair. This was a wasteland. The sky was gray, and the ground was gray. It was as if all life here had been dyed in a gloomy color. What attracted Hallant's attention were the numerous statues that reached the clouds. These statues all had different postures. Some were standing with swords, some were sitting cross-legged and reading, and some were angrily roaring at the sky. However, they all had inconceivably strong bodies and handsome faces, just like those of classical heroes. Their existence here was the truth, as if it had never changed since time immemorial. However, these gigantic statues weren't the only ones here. At the feet of the gigantic statues, numerous small stone people were awakening from their slumber. They shook off their bodies and transformed back into physical bodies. Once the perfect seal created by the four elements was broken, the spatial seal was removed, and the stone statues woke up from their long slumber. Numerous small stone people woke up from their slumber. It was as if they naturally knew what they were supposed to do. They casually picked up rocks and earth to create weapons. Just like that, they used their ancestors' bodies as ladders to climb upwards, just like ants climbing up a human body. However, their climbing wasn't smooth at all. Often, they wouldn't even reach their knees before they would suddenly be attacked by flying mosquitoes, causing them to fall down once again. What's this? A battle between the statues of ants and mosquitoes? Hallant had a bitter smile when he heard this. Those ants are giants. Yep, ancient giants that are at least 10 meters tall. And those mosquitoes are dragons. Those statues, Titan giants. The Titan giants are about to awaken. That's right, these small stone people that weren't even the size of the toes of the gigantic statues were what other species referred to as giants. This game of ants and mosquitoes was an epic battle between giants and dragons. When I made a slight comparison, those towering statues were the legendary Titan giants that were capable of contending against the gods. Since the elemental balance was disrupted, the exiled four elements seal lost a portion of its power. And so, the sealed silver species returned. Attack. The slumbering titans have returned. Chapter 3:13. Giants and dragons were probably the oldest species still living in this world. Back when the goddesses of order and chaos were still in harmony, they hoped that this world wouldn't be so desolate. Only under the dual influence of order and chaos were so many species born. The past events of the immemorial era had become a mess. Countless legends and epics have been passed down to the present day, but they were now nothing more than novels. But at the very least, among the gold citizens, the gold elves, metal dragons, angels, and titan giants were the rulers of the world at that time, as well as the victors of the First Holy War. But time was merciless. The descendants of rulers who lost their crowns often had worse lives than ordinary commoners. The first generation of the gold species didn't have a good life. The gold elves were overthrown by their own species, the superior elves. It was hard to say if the current superior elves counted. The descendants of the angels became the gods' subordinates, while the Titan giants were nothing more than legends and historical remains. As time passed, very few people would remember that when the gold species were finally unable to endure the pain of war, or disappeared from history, or went into seclusion, the second generation of the Holy War was supported by the fallen giants and the superior elves, the Moon Elves. The Moon Elves, who were viewed as traitors by the Gold Elves, also lost absolute control over the elves. In fact, the entire elven species lost their ruling status in this world. The Moon Elves didn't have it easy either. Without the Titan Giants' absolute rule, the Giants were split into two factions in the Holy War. They lost their last drop of blood in the Long War. Now, the Giants had lost most of their intelligence and became scattered tribes. There were also legends that some giant species directly left the mortal plane in order to avoid the god of wisdom's curse of mental retardation. Now, they established a country in another plane that belonged only to the giants. But in reality, apart from a small minority that still retained their intelligence, most of the giants were no different from wild beasts. If they appeared in a densely populated area, it was likely that the intelligent species would send their armies to surround and annihilate them. It could be said that the giants were the most pitiful species in the past. However, I obtained some information from Ale that was close to the truth. There was only one reason for the giants' decline. The Titan giants were no longer around. This was just like an organized empire that suddenly lost its ruler. Not only that, but all those in power were unwilling to submit to anyone else. Plus, there were the constant temptations from other species, demons, as well as the giants' arrogant nature of worshipping power. It would be strange if the empire didn't split apart. In that case, the most fundamental problem was that in this world, only the gods would be able to make the first-generation Titan giants, who were powerful enough to challenge the gods, disappear. And judging from how the entire giant species was cursed, the gods truly didn't like the giants. It would be quite difficult to find out what was going on in the past, and there wouldn't be much meaning in trying to find out. After all, who knew which generation of Maine gods the legendary god of wisdom was? But judging from how his curse was still effective even after his god's name disappeared, he was definitely a top-tier Maine god back in the day. However, if the Titan giants were to return one day and dispel the curse on the giants, they would be able to reunite the various giant tribes. Things would get really interesting if that happened. They're traitors, plotters, and god-killers. They're the enemies of all the gods. When Ale talked about the ancient Titan kings, he became much more serious, which was rare for him. And when he talked about where the Titan giants were now, even Ale indicated that he didn't know either. After all, he hadn't participated in the Titan giants invasion back then. And judging from the game's attack on the giants expansion pack in the game's history, it seemed that the Titan giants' return wasn't far away. In the game's story, The returning Titan giants unhesitatingly declared war on both sides of the Holy War. The Titan giants' individual power levels far surpassed all other creatures. They'll return sooner or later, but it's highly unlikely that they'll return for this holy war. No, they'll definitely return for this holy war. At the time, El sounded quite certain. However, I unhesitatingly dispelled his hopes. Even now, I still remembered AL's rare annoyance when he had to face the Titan Kings. I also knew that the Titan Giants wouldn't miss out on this attack on the Giants expansion pack. But in the game's history, this expansion pack was obviously quite late in the game. After all, it would be impossible for the players at the beginning to deal with the Titan Giants invasion. Even if the Titan Giants were destined to return, I hadn't expected that they would arrive so quickly. But if I thought about the past, the Titan Giants' early arrival actually had something to do with me. Due to a change in the Earth elemental plane, the 4 elemental dimensions are beginning to collapse. It's only a matter of time before the Titan Giants are petrified. The elements are mutually reinforcing and subduing each other. This was the most basic rule of this world. And the most powerful seal in this world was a seal that simulated the natural circulation of the elements. As long as this seal was activated, the 4 elements would begin circulating, and this world would become like a real world with no exit. And this seal's foundational principle was to imitate He's creation of the world. Theoretically speaking, since the Earth elemental dimensions were created based on this world, it would be impossible for any sealing spell to be more powerful than this. And this seal was obviously of a higher level than the one we had created. It absorbed the power of the 4 elements from the 4 elemental planes, creating an illusion of a real world. Even if the world changed, even if the masters of the elemental planes changed, as long as the 4 elemental planes still existed, the sealed dimension would still be effective. But not long ago, in order to kill the Earth elemental god, a certain someone directly shattered the foundation of the elemental planes, the elemental throne. This was the same as killing a flock of hens for the sake of killing an egg. This caused the entire seal to collapse by 1/4. If this was a normal time period, this imbalance could still be adjusted. But right now, the 2 elemental gods were everywhere, and the 2 elemental gods were nowhere to be found. The wind and water elemental tides were furiously increasing, while the Earth elemental plane was absorbing the Earth elemental tide in reverse. It was basically impossible for the Earth elemental plane to be balanced. So, you're saying that it's only a matter of time before the Titan Giants return? But what does this have to do with you dragons? Why do dragons exist in that memory crystal? Back then, I directly asked Howlin about this, and he gave me an answer. The long passage of time could erase all traces. Very few people noticed that the gold and sulfur species from the immemorial generation hadn't all left the mortal plane. However, the only species that could still be seen roaming the mortal plane was the dragons. Of course, the only reason why the gold and sulfur species were still able to survive was because at a certain point in time, the gold and sulfur species became disgusted with this war. They privately came to an understanding with their own species and simultaneously took away all the dragons and dragon descendants from both sides. This was how the current generation of dragons came to be. Dragons were a unified species. There were many different species, and there were so many subspecies that it was impossible to count them all. However, there were 2 main species that were most active in the mortal plane: the color dragons and the metal dragons. The third main species, the gem dragons, weren't even from this world. Their abilities and personalities were quite unique. Although they looked quite similar to ordinary dragons, they were quite different on the inside. Not only that, dragons were one of the few species that had the ability to travel across dimensions and live in other planes. It wasn't strange for gem dragons to have other species that existed in other planes. The metal dragons were the goddess of order's favorites. They were named after the metallic luster of their scales, representing the gold and silver dragons. Since they were creations of order, they often had their own goals and self-discipline. Gold dragons were one of the rare dragons of justice. Silver dragons pursued order and peace, and copper dragons loved jokes and pranks. They were the easiest to deal with out of all the dragons. Of course, this was only relative. In contrast, the color dragons weren't so easy to deal with. These were the black and red dragons from the underground world. The blue dragons were the same. They all had something in common. White dragons were incredibly stupid beasts. Black dragons were sly and good at lying. Red dragons loved to fight and scheme. Blue dragons were highly aggressive, and green dragons loved to prey on intelligent creatures, especially elves. They were the elves' mortal enemies. If I really had to find something in common, it would be that they were incredibly difficult to deal with, incredibly annoying, incredibly greedy, and loved to cause trouble for others. The dragons weren't all that peaceful either. Every family had different personalities, so there would always be trouble. Not to mention, there were far too many personality differences between each species of dragons. Red and silver dragons were mortal enemies, while gold and black dragons were mortal enemies. Dragons also fought amongst themselves several times. At the very least, the black and red dragons who lost in the battles were exiled to the underground world. Since they were all incredibly powerful and didn't have any mortal enemies, most of the surface dragons lived scattered lives. A single dragon would have its own territory with its own kobolds, griffins, and other species. At most, they would live in a family of 3 to 5. But since some of ALS peers were still alive, Dragon City on the surface still had a certain degree of control over the dragons. However, this control was basically zero unless it was absolutely critical. In exchange for our entire species withdrawing from the Holy War, we reached an agreement with the current main gods of order and chaos. We'll forever guard the Titan Giants and the world known as Aladashia. So, you're saying that we've already lost control? Although it's already showing signs of collapse, it's greatly accelerated since 2 months ago. It's likely that it's only a matter of time before the Titan Giants awaken. I don't know the exact time, but it won't be more than 10 years. However, the ordinary giants will probably be able to return to the Earth elemental plane soon. 2 months ago, I just happened to be in the Earth elemental plane, so it would be best not to ask about that. Don't you have any other plans? Did you not make any preparations at all? Originally, with my power level, it would have been impossible for me to have access to such information. However, a senior recently told me that she and His Majesty Orlos had originally planned to connect the undead planes to Aladashia so that the undead emperors and the giants would fight each other and exhaust each other. This was also part of the agreement between Barty and Dragon City. However, it's obviously impossible now. Halen's tone didn't contain any resentment. However, it was obvious that I had something to do with this, which was why I did my best to pretend that I didn't know anything and just looked up at the sky. That fortress that was destroyed by the Mage Country's forbidden spell? And what's the relationship between Barty and the Mage Country? That fortress used to be another undead emperor's base. Large numbers of zombies have already appeared there, and the sacrifices are nearing the end. If we don't deal with it properly, it'll become another Port Victoria. That's why His Majesty Orlos ordered the Truth Symposium to send forbidden spell mages to wipe it out. So the higher-ups of Barty and Dragon City have always been in contact. No, only His Majesty Orlos and a certain archmage from the Truth Symposium have been in contact. Dragon City's representative in Barty also participated in this matter, Lady Evelyn. It's precisely because of Lady Evelyn's order that I'm telling you this information. Yep, it's at least 1/3 of Lady Evelyn's order. Evelyn? Yep. Lady Evelyn said that you definitely wouldn't dare to forget her. Has it affected you? My memory isn't that bad. Isn't she Cher's adopted mother? Judging from Halen's strange expression, I seem to have guessed wrong. He suddenly gripped the letter in his hand and transformed it into dust with lightning. Lady Evelyn also said that if you really forgot, apart from not giving this letter to you, she must tell you something else. What is it? Could it be that Evelyn really was an old acquaintance of mine? She knew that I might intentionally forget her? She still had a backup plan? Lady Evelyn's original words were, "Cher is your daughter, so you're not allowed to do anything to her." Haha, that's right. The silly cat was rolling around on the table in laughter. She was using an incredibly evil method to make her presence known. Congratulations to my host for receiving an honorable title. Do you prefer the title of Demon Father or Crow Mouth? The Demon Father series is Cher has a good father, while the Crow Mouth series is I Believe in You, B.Y. Bailey. Forget it. I'll give you a great discount this time. Cher has a good father named Roland Bailey. Chapter 314. I know everything now. What do you intend to do? Silence me? Since you've said so, you're dead for sure. The furious archmages all roared viciously as they all took out their staffs and randomly shot all sorts of magic at me. They wanted to kill me in just a few moments. This was obviously impossible. After all, they weren't warriors who used their muscles to think, nor were they fanatics who wanted to cleanse everything. Mages tended to understand and communicate with each other, and they were especially patient with their own kind and juniors. Since add a chair for me. Star Revelation's Auntie Umla understood as she sipped some tea without even opening her eyes. Why was she called Auntie Umla? Apart from the obvious motherly aura of this purple-haired female mage who always wore a headscarf, she was also Marguerite's teacher. She was also the one who allowed a rogue mage like Marguerite to enter the world of mages. In fact, she was even the one who helped transform Marguerite into an undying existence. Of course, I still remember the first time we met. Considering our relationship, I took the initiative to greet her. Good morning, Annie. Oh, after a light sigh, the atmosphere on the street suddenly became quite strange. The originally bustling street instantly became empty. My shadow transformed into a living creature that bound me, and the stone floor suddenly transformed into a magical beast that swallowed me whole. The next second, everything returned to normal. The sky was still as blue as ever, and there was no damage at all on the street. Only then did I realize that everything had been an illusion. Actually, you can call me Sister Umla. An illusion? A soul world? No, it's not such a simple thing. All right then, from that day onward, I began to respect the Cloud Tower's mages even more. At the very least, these mages who appeared to be ordinary little girls were actually ancient artifacts who had lived to this day. Although they were all semi-gods, it was impossible to calculate the difference in power level between semi-gods. For mages, experience and knowledge were both important factors in power level. I had heard of the blind Umla back when I was still an acolyte. I still needed to show proper respect to this unfathomably old witch. At such a time, I decisively expressed my gratitude. Thank you, Auntie Umla. You're so understanding. As expected, I blacked out before I even finished speaking. Oh, it's here again. The feeling of being forgotten in a corner of a world, and then being devoured. Why aren't you continuing? This time it stopped halfway, and the world returned to normal. Sigh. Then, I heard a certain lady sigh. I shrugged, feeling that it was a pity that I had missed the chance to find out the other party's trump card. I casually pulled out a chair and sat down. The door behind me slammed shut, which doubtlessly meant that a new round of rituals had begun, and I was now one of them. Epic storyline. Return home in glory, or fall to the ground like a phoenix. It will be fully activated. The next step of development will be decided based on your results in the meeting. My system was always one step late, but since I was already here and I had already completed my goal, it would be nice to be able to earn some fate points along the way. Based on my past experience, although there wouldn't be any rewards to look forward to in the middle of these quests, there would always be surprises to look forward to at the end. Then, let's move on to the next topic. Pa. An elderly mage wearing reading glasses trembled as he picked up his document. He was just about to change the topic when he was interrupted by a round of clapping. I glanced over, and, as I expected, it was the same brat who had just sat down. It was fine if it was a coincidence once, but it was obvious that he was doing it on purpose twice. This time, most of the mages present were dissatisfied. Any ordinary person would probably pee their pants from being stared at by so many mages with the divine truths of truth. But for me, didn't those unfriendly gazes and the frightening pressure from their weak bodies mean that they couldn't do anything to me? I really enjoyed being able to kill you with looks. Fine. This time, I really wasn't intentionally causing trouble. Don't you all want to know where I learned the truth? I just received information from Barty. Does anyone want to know? The Titan's return has sped up. The giants outside the walls have returned. Don't stare at me like that. I'll get embarrassed if you act so passionately. Do you all want to see an old man blush so much? Pervert. At that moment, I had a godly acting skill as I curled my pinky finger and lightly gestured. That damn pinky finger. Nobody has ever been able to disgust so many archmages who don't care about worldly affairs with a single action, making them want to kill him, by all the archmages participating in this conference. The conference's progress? It had already been 2 days since the conference ended. Would there be any results just because I was here? Especially when I brought new problems with me. As expected, there's no solution to this problem. The only thing that could cause so many archmages to fall into such a predicament was the current stalemate. For the mage country of Arlo, the best situation would be for the mage country to remain neutral and defend itself. However, this was obviously impossible. Just because you didn't go looking for trouble didn't mean that trouble wouldn't come looking for you. From a certain standpoint, Bardi's Emperor Orlas was truly a sly old fox. He was probably the first person to fall into this trap. His country had already been targeted by the undead more than 30 years ago. This was the first problem. The second problem was the Dragon Knight Squadron. The proud dragon descendants obediently listened to the human empire's commands. However, this wasn't just because I guessed that they were half-blood bastard children's nursery. They had actually always been on a mission to guard the Dragon World. What was Dragon World? It was the world where the Titan giants slept. That world was indeed an eternal prison prepared specifically for the Titan giants and their bloodline. However, due to the abnormally high elemental density, it's especially suitable for dragon eggs to hatch, young dragons to grow, old dragons to live in retirement, and young dragons to give birth. That's why you guys converted the Titan Giants prison into a nursery and nursing home, giving birth and nursing home, turning it into a sex house. From a certain standpoint, I had to hand it to the dragons. However, for them, this was probably just like how humans would think about their surroundings when they moved. They would move to a warmer island that was more suitable for living. As for the Titan Giants, they haven't woken up in tens of thousands of years. They definitely won't wake up in our generation. All right then, although this sounded ridiculous, it wasn't just the dragons who thought this way. So what if they pollute the water and air? I can't drink it anyways. Save energy? Oil will run out? Relax, there'll definitely be new technology to solve this problem. Perhaps the first generation of dragons would seriously guard the Titan Giant seal. The second generation would only occasionally look at the Titan Giant seal. Several dozen, or even several hundred generations later, the Titan Giant seal would be nothing more than a distant legend. Enjoying the most comfortable environment in the world was the most practical thing right now. Have you ever considered that if the Titan Giants really do wake up, and if they wake up really quickly, neither the old dragons nor the young dragons will be able to escape? Actually, no matter if they were dragons or humans, as long as they were intelligent species, there was no foundational difference between how they thought about things that didn't concern them and how they were suicidal. Only now did I realize that the dragons are also a group of self-destructive optimists who dig their own grave. I still remembered that when I said this, Orlas's face was as red as a monkey's, but the handsome boy lowered his head and blushed as if he was embarrassed. He looked just like a shy little girl, which was quite admirable. Yep, ignoring the cause and effect, the conclusion was obvious. The dragons definitely had a secret agreement with the Bardi Empire, which was why every generation of the Bardi Empire had a Dragon Knight Squadron. Of course, the dragons would also receive assistance from the ruler of this country, such as providing labors, food and water resources, and providing protection for imports and exports. And since this country had a Dragon Knight protecting it, the citizens wouldn't be too surprised if a dragon occasionally appeared. Dragon World was one of the top 3 dragons in HE. But now that the Titan Giants had awakened, it had become the cruelest battlefield. The dragons would probably do their utmost to stall the giants for the sake of successfully transferring their young dragons and dragon eggs. But once the true Titan Giants entered the battlefield, things would probably get out of hand. Does Orlas know? Does he know that the Titan Giants might return in this holy war? As the Emperor of the Bardi Empire, he probably knew when he ascended to the throne. As for why I called Orlas a sly old fox, that was because he clearly knew that his own country was in trouble, yet he still furiously expanded his territory, dragging other countries into trouble as well. Where's the entrance to Dragon World? Why haven't they evacuated all the dragons and young dragons? The entrance to Dragon World is in the Bardi capital. As for why they haven't evacuated, it's not that they don't want to evacuate. It's that it's impossible to evacuate. The order to evacuate was given more than 100 years ago, but some dragon eggs' mothers don't even know where they are. And the situation there is quite special. Only after I asked him did I learn that Dragon World really had become a world for dragons. There were many dragons there, and since there were no natural enemies and the environment was good, they could simply bury their dragon eggs and wait for them to automatically sprout. Plus, dragons were naturally lustful by nature. There were many semi-dragons, dragons, and mixed-blood dragons living there. Otherwise, Dragon World wouldn't have become one of the top 3 dragons' residences. What do the dragons think of the undead? This question made Halent even more embarrassed. He didn't say anything for quite a while. In the end, he could only helplessly shake his head. All right then, I didn't even need to guess. Those gigantic lizards that could eat mortals with a single bite probably couldn't be bothered to care. What? The threat of the undead? Don't they already have a Dragon Knight squadron? What does the mortal world have to do with us? Don't disturb our sleep. Keep arguing? I'll eat you all in one bite if you keep arguing. Now, it was likely that their dragon eggs were in danger, which was why they hurriedly asked for reinforcements. And since the Cloud Tower was one of the few existences that they respected, it was likely that the Cloud Tower was the closest to them, as well as the only mortal who would ask for reinforcements. No matter if it was an undead invasion or the return of the Titan Giants, both would be major trouble. And if both of them came together, it would be a major problem. By the way, in the game's history, Emperor Aso seemed to have fallen into Orlas's trap as well. If he had opened the dimensional door to the Bardi Empire's capital, he would likely have had a friendly clash with the Titan Giants. If he had opened the dimensional door to the Bardi Empire's capital, it was likely that the Giants and the Undead would have already started fighting in Dragon World. In that case, it was only natural that the Titan Giants would arrive so late. In this generation, Orlas was still a sly old fox. Now that I thought about it, it was likely that he still had some influence over the undead. No matter if it was Victoria Port or that fortress that had been destroyed by a forbidden spell, they both had one thing in common. They were both located near the Bardi Empire's border, and they just happened to be near the Mage Country's territory. In fact, they were even closer to the Cloud Tower than they were to the Bardi Empire's capital. And once the undead army appeared, with Orlas causing trouble, all Bardi needed to do was maintain its alliance with the undead. If it weren't for the Forest of Dreams and the Mage Country's decisive forbidden spell, it would have been quite obvious that the undead calamity would have broken through to the Mage Country. And that forbidden spell that destroyed another undead emperor's plan to open a dimensional door to the Bardi Empire might have eliminated the threat, but it also completely dragged the Mage Country into trouble. Perhaps even the sacrifice at Victoria Port was a show for the Mage Country to see. It was to prove how vicious Orlas was towards himself and his enemies. Perhaps he had even threatened to open all dimensional doors to the Mage Country's border if the Mage Country didn't do anything. Tui, perhaps Orlas even notified the Mage Country beforehand. No wonder Amelia knew about this. But no matter what the Cloud Tower chooses, they still won't be able to escape from this trouble. What a familiar style. It's clearly an overt plot. It resonates with you? It's the exact same dirty method you used. Heloise, please call him the wisdom of an adult. Not long ago, Orlas seemed to have achieved his goal. At the very least, the Mage Country had suffered greatly, and the Archmages in their ivory towers were now forced to fight to the death against the undead. All right then, let's not argue about how good Orlas was at tricking people. At any rate, both sides had screwed up. The undead were invading ahead of schedule. Due to the existence of the Forest of Dreams and the location of the dimensional doors, it was likely that the direction of the invasion would change. And the Titan Giants had awakened much earlier than expected. It was likely that the dimensional doors would still open in the capital, and Orlos would probably be stomping about anxiously. How strong are the Titan giants? I had asked Talent this question before. Now, I was asked the same question again at the Truth Symposium. However, the result would probably be the same. I don't know. There are no records of them at all. Of course, there were no records. It was unknown when the Titan giants had been sealed away. The gods had intentionally erased all records regarding the Titan giants. So how could I possibly know how strong they were? However, I knew that the Titan giants that had been sealed away were all undying existences. Even the main gods back in the day were unable to completely destroy them. It would be more appropriate to treat them as main gods. In that case, what do the dragons intend for us to do? Help them take care of the giants? Let me say this first. I have no intentions of becoming cannon fodder for those lizards. We could try communicating with the Titan giants. Nice idea. I nodded. Perhaps thinking about things from a different perspective would make things much more interesting. This was indeed a common method used by mages, but that's impossible. In ancient times, the Titan giants would look down on inferior imitations of their own physical characteristics. And the giants are related to the ogres by blood. Yep, you guessed correctly. The giants will eat people. Would you discuss with the eggs in your bowl how to pretend to be a family tomorrow? This wasn't a lie at all. This was an interesting story that I had heard from Ale. The Titan giants' bloodline was a major family. Not only were there giants, ogres, and other commonly seen large human species, there were even dwarves and stone beastmen among them. The Great Demon Empire and the Great Elf Empire were mortal enemies from the same generation. They became the rulers of this world one after the other. The epic feud between the Titan giants' children and the Gold Elf King was still a classic opera in the opera house. But soon, it was likely that there would be an additional The Forgotten Countries and The Forsaken, currently being written by Roland, in the opera house. Those lizards aren't that stupid. What they want us to do is to think of a way to maintain the balance of the elements and delay the Titan giants' revival. This will give them more time to relocate and prepare for battle. So you're saying, yep, we either need to quickly kill off those 2 elemental gods that are running around everywhere, or we need to find 2 more elemental creatures to ascend to godhood. At the very least, we need to achieve a balance of the elements. Yep, it will be far too difficult to kill off 2 elemental gods who were most likely hiding in their own dimensions. In the end, there would only be one choice. We just killed off the Earth elemental god, and now we need to create a new one? Is this really the result of our own actions? Chapter 3:15. The second day after I left the conference room, the Truth Symposium sent me a small golden badge in the shape of question mark, which finally added some weight to my chest. Although this small badge wasn't much, it meant that the Truth Symposium would notify me as soon as they held a formal meeting in the future. They would also reserve a seat for me, and the Great Industrial Party was now recognized by everyone as a powerful mage organization. My bastard subordinates could finally hold their heads high. As for whether or not the Truth Symposium had any results, of course not. If just sitting together and drinking tea, chatting, and having a conference could solve all problems, then the world would be far too easy to live in. Naturally, there wouldn't be any wars. Orlos and the dragons had a simple way of thinking. After all, if the Titan giants appeared, all of human society would be doomed. Helping us would be the same as helping yourself, and helping us would be fine as well. At any rate, we would all be doomed together. At any rate, Barty would never be able to escape this holy war. They had nothing to lose, so they were quite optimistic about it. As for the mages, it was certain that they weren't in a good mood. Nobody would feel good about being randomly made a scapegoat. It was no wonder that they were completely uninterested in Barty's so-called peace treaty. Judging from Halen's description, the dragons were quite optimistic. They probably believed that as long as they stabilized the elemental throne and then had the archmages repair the seal, they would be able to protect Dragon World. In fact, since the Holy War was going quite smoothly, some dragons even believed that the Titan giants were nothing special. Perhaps they could even fight to the death against the Titan giants. I could understand their overly optimistic mentality. After all, if someone predicted that Earth would soon be destroyed and caused everyone to panic, humanity's first reaction definitely wouldn't be to work together to develop space technology so that they could migrate to other planets. Instead, they would first kill the Jinxer and then think of a way to save the world. Perhaps a few world-saving heroes would appear out of nowhere. Nobody would be willing to give up on their home until the very last moment. However, it was obvious that it would be quite difficult for a world-saving hero to appear in a dramatic fashion. That was because things had gone too far this time. Saving the world was far too difficult for any individual to accomplish. If we want to balance the elemental planes, there are only two choices. Either we ensure that all 4 elemental gods are in balance, or we kill all of them. Emotionally speaking, I was leaning towards the former. After all, the wind and water elemental gods were still connected to me, and I still had information on the water elemental god. Perhaps I would be able to use it in the future. But strategically speaking, I was leaning towards the latter. That would reduce the increase of the elemental tide and reduce the difficulty of the elemental planes. But it could be said that it would be far too difficult to kill the other 2 elemental gods. If I were the wind elemental god or the water elemental god, after the fire elemental god and the earth elemental god perished, I would definitely obediently hide in my own nest, resolutely refusing to come out until the outside world was turned upside down. Immortal Lorcan, who was heavily injured and on the verge of death, was already so difficult to deal with even in his own territory. I didn't want to know just how powerful an elemental god in perfect condition would be in his own dimension. As for the latter, although it would be quite difficult, it was actually possible to accomplish. After all, Eliza was the one who devoured the fire elemental god, and the earth elemental throne shard was still in my frigid winter earth. Plus, I had a veteran earth elemental god, the stone sculptor. As long as I invested enough, it wouldn't be impossible to create 2 more elemental gods. However, I didn't take the initiative to take on this task during the meeting. Providing help in a time of need and adding flowers to a brocade were 2 completely different things. I wasn't foolish enough to take on this difficult task myself so quickly. In that case, let's temporarily put aside the dragon's request. If anyone has any plans, please bring them up as soon as possible. In the end, the meeting didn't come to a conclusion on this topic. After all, this task was far too difficult. Even if I threw it into the system, it would at least be an epic-level quest. Did I jinx it again? Congratulations, Comrade Bailey. Your epic-level side quest, Investiture or God-Slaying, has been activated. Quest requirements, you understand. Quest reward, you understand. Punishment for failing to complete the quest, you understand. The hell I understand. I hate things like you understand the most. Is it really that difficult to explain things clearly? Understand? Understand? The hell you understand? Why do you have to make me so confused? I don't understand at all. All right then. After complaining for a while, I could only helplessly accept reality and take the initiative to prepare for this quest. Yep. As soon as I thought about the punishment, my imagination began to wander in crazy directions. What type of punishment will it be? Doesn't my system love making things that I hate the most? Forcefully making Princess Peach a permanent character? Possessing a spearman with negative misfortune for more than a week? Or even having him participate in a bodybuilding competition that Omar has? Sometimes, people's imaginations were limitless. Scaring yourself would always be the scariest. Even a dragon slayer could be scared to death by his own shadow. A king who possessed everything could go insane from seeing himself in a mirror in the future where he was about to die. Usually, people who say you understand haven't even thought about it yet. I haven't thought about it yet, but since you've thought about it for me, the punishment will be all of the above. How about it? You're scamming me again. All right then, complaining was useless in the face of power. Now, I had a reason that I couldn't fail no matter what. My impromptu suggestion hadn't come to a conclusion, so there was no answer to their original worries. How should they deal with the undead? The undead emperors hadn't arrived yet, and it was impossible to close the dimensional door. The true battle was only in its countdown. Would they be able to rush into the Bardi Empire and establish a frontline fortress? In that case, Orlos would probably laugh his head off at having so many free cannon fodder. He could only take things one step at a time. The Bardi Empire's request for peace should be able to be dealt with? Wouldn't agreeing to peace be the same as giving up on any reason to interfere? But if the Bardi Empire continued to chase after the Bardi Empire, wouldn't it cause the Bardi Empire to collapse sooner than it should? If the Bardi Empire collapsed, wouldn't the Mage Country be the first to suffer the brunt of the Bardi Empire's destruction? Perhaps when the truth was revealed, some archmages with bad tempers would want nothing more than to immediately head out and kill that sly old fox. Unfortunately, the mages would need to pray for the Bardi Empire's stability for a long time to come, so that they could at least fend off more calamities. The dragons had just sent a request for reinforcements. I'll discuss it later. This request was far too difficult. It was likely that the dragon world was in a complete mess right now. Any ordinary mage that participated in the battle between the giants and dragons would be committing suicide. When I returned to my little garden, I discovered that Halent, who had come to deliver the letter, had already left. He left. Are you joking? This morning, he even said that he was waiting for my reply. Dragon Knight Archduke Halent is busy with official business, so he said goodbye first. Since I'm here, I'll help him take his leave. The one who replied was the little girl Cher. Recently, she had been visiting me more and more often. Thanks to my hard work and repeated suicidal behavior, our relationship seemed to have improved. At the very least, we didn't have any problems communicating anymore. Yep, didn't all girls like gifts? That was why I kept giving her all sorts of small gifts. Expensive and large items were given to me in units. The police station was filled with a sea of flowers when I opened the door. Recently, the guards at the police station were all looking at me strangely, and then, before Cher could even react, I mysteriously gained several honorary titles of Demon Father. Even my subordinates were looking at me strangely. Cough! This had nothing to do with the daughter mentioned in Cher's letter. I simply want to get to know the local mages better. I also wanted to investigate what exactly happened back in the day and what that Evelyn wanted. That was why I simply sent her flowers every day and pick her up after work. I definitely didn't have any other intentions. I didn't know if Cher's opinion of me had changed, but at the very least, I was the one who helped her. Not only that, I had been doing my best to prevent the garden from being discovered by the police station. Heloise, can't you just be old or young? I had also been going to the police station to pick her up. This was mainly because those bastards had learned how to deal with the security here, making it even more difficult to catch, and I'd been helping out with investigations less often. At the very least, she had been treating me more politely. She looked around as she said this. She seemed hesitant, as if she had something she wanted to say. Relax. Nobody can eavesdrop on me here. Everyone here is someone I trust. An urgent letter has arrived from the Bardi Empire. The undead have begun attacking the Bardi Empire. Nitrain City is in a state of emergency. Archduke Halent is rushing back to help.